Necromancy. The true art lies not in the destruction of life, but in the manipulation of its very essence. To a necromancer, death is not the end. It is a tool, a resource. Necromancy in Baldur's Gate 3 is not simply the art of raising the dead. It is the art of giving them cause once more. The dead do not rest in peace. They rest in purpose. And when we call them, they answer. Greetings, mortals! It is I, Remortis, and today I bring you my guide to all things necromancy in Baldur's Gate 3. With patch 8 finally out, I decided to gather all information regarding necromancy within Baldur's Gate 3. Well beyond that of just the necromancer wizard, because there is oh so much more. In this guide, we'll be going over each and every class and subclass that can be a necromancer, with builds and items as well as gameplay tips and strategies. Fear not though, as there will be timestamps below to skip to whatever is relevant to you, whether it's a build order or perhaps how to maintain enough corpses to sustain your undead army. I've got you. However, it did take me quite a bit of time to gather all this information, so before you dart around throughout the chapters, please like, comment, and subscribe, as it will help this channel immensely. And without further ado, let's just get right into it, shall we? Delving into the forbidden arts requires caution, and not just from the undead. Just like necromancers protect their secrets from prying eyes, you should protect your digital life with Surfshark VPN. That's right, today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Surfshark masks your IP, encrypts your data, and lets you browse safely, even in the depths of the shadow-cursed lands. Want to access region-locked content like you're teleporting through a dimension door? Boom, Surfshark. Seamlessly change your virtual location so that you can access content that you normally wouldn't have access to. Public Wi-Fi at your local tavern or cafe? Don't let digital goblins steal your info. Use my code Remortis at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. And if you decide it's not for you, no worries. Surfshark has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so try it risk-free. Because in this world or any realm, you never know who's watching. And now back to the video. So why choose necromancy? Whether you're a wizard commanding legions of the dead, a cleric wielding the power of death itself, or a warlock tapping into forbidden powers, necromancy offers one of the most unique and flavorful ways to experience Baldur's Gate 3. The ability to control undead minions, deal necrotic damage, and be able to talk to the dead as well, can offer a unique gaming experience that's different than just a blow 'em up build. And let's face it, is necromancy the most optimal builds to go with? Probably not. Can it do the most damage? Potentially. Can it be really clunky with all those undead minions? Oh, absolutely. But is it friggin' cool? Hell yeah, it is. And honestly, Baldur's Gate 3 does a really good job at depicting necromancy. While we can't summon nearly as many undead as we can on tabletop, we do have stronger undead to compensate for that. The zombies have way more damage than they normally would, same thing with skeletons, and the ghouls are just devastating. But we'll get more on the undead minion part of things a little bit later. So I do want to caveat though, as if you're playing a full necromancy party, meaning you're going to have a lot of undead minions, it may be a bit clunky because you'll have to take each and every single turn for each of those summons. Luckily for us, some of the undead that we can summon will be automatically controlled by the AI, and I want to have another caveat here, is that now that we have access to the Death Domain Cleric, it's a very strong subclass, don't get me wrong, but compared to the other elemental types, necrotic damage doesn't really get any love in terms of synergies with various items, such as radiant damage getting radiant orbs, or fire damage getting heat, all that kind of stuff. There really isn't anything like that in the ways of supporting necrotic damage. There is a few cool necromancy stabs in the game. Obviously, a lot of stuff in Act 2 is resistant or just flat out immune to it, but more often than not, necrotic damage will do you quite well. Although you should be careful with your necrotic damage, as this will roll into our next subject, corpses. Necromancy is unique in Baldur's Gate 3 in that it relies on another resource that isn't always readily available: and that would be the bodies of our slain enemies. But we need to understand how to eliminate our foes without damaging the goods, so to speak. Certain elements in the game will prevent you from communing, raising, or exploding all of these lovely bodies. And those elements would be acid, fire, lightning, radiant, and sadly, necrotic damage. All of these elements will completely destroy the corpse and we won't be able to utilize them. So be very cautious on what elements you're using to slay your foes. Luckily, we have plenty of access to poison, cold, force, psychic, and thunder damage. And those will probably be our main sources of damage throughout the game. Although if you still want to use necromancy and necrotic damage, by all means, go for it. There's nothing faulting you for there because there are plenty and plenty of bodies to utilize for your minions, if you want to use minions at all. For maintaining corpses and looking for corpses to raise, one thing that you can do in your camp is with this lovely chest here. And as you can see, we have tons and tons of bodies for us to use for future activities, whether it be for corpse explosions or perhaps raising a small army. We have the bodies. One thing you might notice by just taking a quick glance at all of these, that they have to be small or tiny bodies for us to be able to do this method. As of right now, you cannot pick up medium corpses. So try to utilize all the medium corpses you find in the world before you resort to your little shorty stash. But if you do come across a bunch of short humanoids, make sure you snag the corpses afterwards, so that way you can shove them in this lovely chest. In Act 2, once you've reached to Moonrise Towers, head on down to where the prison is and make your way up here. You can jump on this box and jump up here if you're not strong enough to jump high, or you can missy step, whatever you need to do to get up here. Just make your way like here, like so, and you'll come to this cracked rock. Looks like a big chasm over here. Want to crawl down, and you'll come to a location called the Oubliettes. By simply entering down here, you will be able to get a buff here called Rejuvenating Miasma, which will allow you to use Animate Dead without requiring a corpse. There are some hooked horrors here you can decide to fight for some easy XP, by the way.
What's next?
But as you can simply see, we'll go ahead and just go do our upcasted Animate Dead there. We got our skeletons.
Ready and willing. Here with heart. Oh, I have the magic touch.
And our zombies. Okay, just kidding. The zombies won't work, so make sure you use your skeletons. Unfortunately, the zombie portion is still bugged. Let's go ahead and recast this and get our skeletons then. So hopefully we can spread this video enough so that Larian can see that the zombies still do not work, and perhaps they might be able to give us a bug fix for that. Specifically, it only affects upcasted versions of Animate Dead zombies. As you can see, we're doing a single target zombie with a scroll, and we can get a single zombie. But whenever you try to cast multiple, for some reason they do not work. At the end of the day, having an army of skeletons isn't so bad. They still do pretty solid attacks. You just won't be able to chain a big army of zombies. Considering that most of the enemies in Act 2 are undead, it wouldn't really matter all that much. So now that we've discussed some ways to acquire and retain corpses for future use, let's go over the minions themselves. Beginning with our zombies. Zombies are actually pretty cool in Baldur's Gate 3. They have 22 hit points by default. Obviously, there's other ways to increase that through spells or by being a Necromancer wizard. They do a considerable amount of damage with their unarmed strike here, with their slam. Does 2d6 plus 3 bludgeoning damage, and more importantly, it'll apply an effect called Crawling Gnaw, which is a disease effect. If you can defeat an enemy that has Crawling Gnaw on them, they will perish and become a newborn zombie, which is identical to the zombie itself, except it has 10 hit points rather than 22. And every turn it'll take 1 necrotic damage until it no longer exists. So the newborn zombies are all temporary, whereas these zombies that we have here are permanent, or at least until they're slain. But not only do they only have 10 hit points, but they are automatically controlled by the AI, which is good because eventually you're going to be able to summon a ton of these, and it'll be a big pain in the butt to have to manually remove each and every single one. Another cool thing about the zombies themselves is that they have Undead Fortitude here. If the killing blow isn't a critical hit, and it wasn't radiant damage, the undead comes back to life with 1 hit point. so they can be pretty durable. Annoying thing about that though, should they trigger Undead Fortitude and, you know, instead of dying they have 1 hit point, it'll end up skipping their turn. That's just something you need to know. So zombies are really cool, mostly for the fact that you can make really crazy snowballs with this crawling gnaw ability and just making tons of zombies and even more zombies. So some places I really like to make a zombie horde is in the Githyanki Crash, or with the Dwergar in Grimforge, and even storming Moonrise Towers. However, Moonrise Towers is full of paladins, so they probably won't be too affected by our zombies here. Try to focus on targets that your zombies can hit, or try to let the zombies get the final hit, or just secure those kills with things like Magic Missile or just other ways to create even more zombies. One thing to note though that I discovered in patch 8, if a target has both the Hexblade Curse and Crawling Gnaw, you'll be able to still get a fresh newborn zombie just like normal, but the Hexblade Curse will also create a Spectre for the Hexblade. But more on that later. Before we move on to the next undead type, let's go ahead and look at the Fungal Zombie. These are zombies that can be made exclusively by the Spore Druid. They are just about identical other than 9 hit points, and can be summoned from beast and humanoid corpses. So moving on to our skeletons. These are pretty formidable undead units here. They are ranged attackers, unfortunately. I wish we could actually equip them with other weapons. They use an unarmed strike, but they do have a pretty powerful bow. You can see, just do a melee attack there. However, they are armed with short bows, but they also do a little bit more damage than a short bow. As you can see here, we do a 1d6 plus 3 piercing damage with our short bow, but on top of that we get, I guess, a necrotic strike on there as well. And we'll always do an additional 1d10 necrotic damage. So with having a ton of these around, you could have some pretty good damage on the back line. Their hit rate isn't the best, however, they also do tend to go pretty early in the combat order. And they are vulnerable to bludgeoning damage, so be wary of that. They have a 16 dex, so again, skeletons are pretty solid, and you can't really go wrong with them, with either zombies or skeletons. Now we move on to the ghoul. This is where things start getting pretty crazy. Granted, having zombie hordes is pretty fun, the ghoul is a lot stronger than the zombie. Their attack here does 6 to 21 damage, which is pretty solid. But more importantly, each time they attack, they have a chance to paralyze a target. And if you do land the paralyzed condition on an enemy, you can just pretty much make an encounter completely negligible. And there are even certain boss fights in the game that can be trivialized because of it, such as Gortash. So these guys can pack a decent punch, but if you get a paralyze on somebody, you can just swarm them with the rest of your minions. Now, there are a few interesting things about the ghoul beyond just their attack. Here is their stat line. 16 strength, 17 dex, 10 con, 17 AC, 35 hit points. This is just the default ghoul. Obviously, if you're playing a Necromancer Wizard, they'll be a little bit stronger and do a little bit more damage as well. But the interesting thing about the ghouls here is they have another special feature here called Devour, where you can bite a knocked out, prone, or sleeping target and deal 6 to 33 slashing damage, and then heal on top of that. Pretty damn nice. And it doesn't really guarantee that you can apply those conditions. However, your ghouls do have the ability to trigger non-lethal attacks, so you could go ahead and devour them after you slay them, I suppose. But this is a very reliable summon, and it's even cooler for the fact that you can actually get 5 of them at all times, pretty much for the most part, once you finish unlocking the rest of the Necromancy of Thay. And in comparison to the regular ghoul, here are the... see if I can actually look at them. It doesn't really state it here, but whenever these ghouls perish, they will actually explode. I don't think we can actually select them, unfortunately. I wish we could. It doesn't really show us. Yeah, whenever these guys die, they will explode, dealing necrotic damage to everybody around them, including themselves, so you can do a bunch of chain reactions of making them all explode on each other. Sometimes it can be good, sometimes it can be bad. So, just something to keep in mind of. The other main difference between the regular ghoul and the ghoul summoned by the Necromancy of Thay is that these are not controllable. These are going to be controlled by the AI. So the flying ghoul is just about identical. It does have a little bit less AC and a little bit less health. However, it has the ability to fly. Who would have thought? So this can help them get around the battlefield a lot easier to swarm the enemies. It kind of gave me Wizard of Oz vibes, honestly. And that is the Ghoul and Flying Ghoul. Now we will look at the last undead that we can summon at will. And that is the Mummy with the level 6 spell called Create Undead. The Mummy does hit pretty hard. can see here it does 833 damage, half of that being necrotic. And then on top of that, we have a chance to inflict mummy rot, which just means that their maximum hit points is reduced and they cannot be healed on top of that. So this could be really effective on targets that heal a lot. Another thing to know for your mummies is that they are vulnerable to fire damage, so be wary of that. But they do come with the resistance to physical damage of slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning, and they're also immune to necrotic damage. So don't worry about casting your circles of death around them. Now, another thing to note is that they have a multi-attack option, but the target has to be frightened. And essentially it'll do double damage. But the mummies also come with their own ability to make things afraid of it, but it does consume an action. So if you have other ways to inflict frightened condition on people, maybe the mummies would be a good ally for you to take advantage of that. But they do have a pretty good amount of health and are a decent body on the battlefield. I wouldn't really rely on them too much though, but it's so neat that we can have this option. But when you slay an enemy with the Hex Curse, either by using the actual ability itself, Hexblade's Curse, or when you attack somebody with a Hex weapon, you have a chance to apply your Hexblade Curse. And when you do slay them, you can summon a Cursed Spectre. Now these are pretty sweet, as there are 3 different variants of it we can summon. It all depends on the target's body size, whether they're small, medium, or large. And so most of the time, we're just going to be able to get the Mundane Spectre, as you can see here.
Murdered someone in view of a guard. Perhaps.
We'll just go ahead and let these guys come to us, honestly. So these Spectres are actually quite nice. I don't think they scale with our level, though, so this is going to be about the same throughout the majority of the game. Unfortunately, the inspect screen is all kind of goofy here. But this is what they look like. They look really cool. Again, there is 3 different variants. The Mundane, which is the medium, and Feeble, which is small, and I forget the name of the large one is, but the large one's really cool and has 4 arms. Anyways, just by looking at the Spectre, here's its stat block. It has a lot of good resistances and immunities here, and they can be pretty tanky for you. They are ethereal, so they cannot be shoved, thrown, or be used as an improvised weapon. They cannot move, even though they have the incorporeal movement. They are stationary, and they're going to be pretty much using their turn to do specific actions here. And the Mundane Spectre, and specifically its main basic attack, is going to be this Soul Drain here, right here, Devour Soul. Consume the soul of your Warlock's enemy while healing the Warlock for half the health. It doesn't do a ton, but it's still neat that they can do that. And then obviously the other option is an ability called Pluck, which is a pulling type ability. They'll try to pull the target towards you. Usually the smaller Spectres will try to use that as their main attack. And the larger Spectres will do this really cool melee multi-attack, and they just slap the crap out of somebody. I'll try to show you guys some footage of that. So another really cool thing about the Spectres is that when you do attack a target that has the Hexblade Curse, let's see if we can apply it on them. Yeah, there it is. Our Spectres will use their reaction to attack that target. You can summon one every turn using your reaction, so be mindful of when you're using reactions for opportunity attacks or using defensive abilities like shield or counterspell, because then you have to decide if you want to summon another Spectre or, use your reaction for something else. Though, should you acquire the endgame item, the Duelist Prerogative, you can use 2 reactions, so in theory you could summon 2 Spectres per turn, and having a ton of Spectres is just really, really cool. A very welcome addition to Baldur's Gate indeed. And before we move on to all the different classes that can be Necromancers, I just want to speak real quick about 2 early game Necromancer items that you may or may not know about. One being the Necromancy of Thay book, as well as Second Marriage, a lovely wand that lets you summon a zombie for the entirety of the game. Well, kinda. Let's go on to the Necromancy of Thay first. The Necromancy of Thay is a pretty sweet tome that you can find in the Apothecary's Cellar in the Blighted Village in Act 1. Make your way through the hidden passage and past the skeleton ambush, as well as answering the riddles of the mirror, and you'll be able to get into the Apothecary's Cellar main room. There you'll find the book just sitting on a pedestal. As soon as you move it though, you'll activate some traps, but if you just grab it and run away fast enough, you should be just fine. You don't need to really worry about disarming any of the traps. When you look at the book, it has a gaping maw that seems to be empty. This is meant to be filled by the Dark Amethyst, a large purple gem found next to the Phase Spider Matriarch, which is under the other building within the Blighted Village. So once you best the Spider Matriarch, you'll see it on the ground, really close to the giant hole to the Underdark. Simply insert the amethyst into the book, and you will simply insert the amethyst into the book once you activate it, and depending on your class, you'll have a variety of different checks you must make in order to read the pages, with each one getting harder and harder. If you manage to turn at least one page of the book, you'll automatically be given the spell Speak with the Dead for free, which can be used as a ritual and does not consume spell slots, and you can use this as many times as you want per day. A very useful spell to have to figure things out in case a certain NPC may have perished. Many NPCs throughout the game will talk to you beyond death. Though if you're the one that killed the person, then you will need to combine Speak with the Dead with Disguise Self. So as long as you're disguised, you'll be able to talk to anybody. Otherwise, they'll refuse, since you're the one that murdered them. However, if you do turn 3 pages, regardless of your success or not, you'll be granted the Forbidden Knowledge passive feature, which is simply just a +1 to all wisdom and ability checks. Pretty sweet. But where the book really becomes awesome is in Act 3. Should you manage to sneak your way into the vaults of Sorceress Sundries in the lower city in Act 3, you can come across the Tharkiet Codex, which will allow you to continue reading the Book of Thay to gain the spell called Danse Macabre, which will let you summon 5 ghouls once per long rest. Although it seems to refresh when you jump between Rivington and the lower city proper. And these are some pretty sweet ghouls, as we covered in the minion section. But all in all, this is kind of a cool little quest line for a Necromancer themed character, and even if you're not, just having those extra ghouls, if you succeed all the spell checks, is pretty sweet to have it as well. So yeah, keep an eye out for this if you haven't already. Most likely you have, but in case you didn't, well, enjoy. Now let's move on to Bitter Divorce and Second Marriage. You can find an interesting Necromancer type item in Auntie Ethel's lair. Once you defeat her, if you manage to save Mayrina, you can still get the hag if you pass your intimidation check and get both Mayrina and the hair. But either way, all that matters is that you need to save Mayrina and come to the back of Auntie Ethel's lair here and pick up this little wand called Bitter Divorce. And then simply head outside by going over to the moon circle here. And once you're outside, make your way over here to where Mayrina is, next to this coffin. Pick the option, I found a wand, I think I can resurrect your husband. Now, you could do an evil option here and just break the wand in 2, and then your guy just kind of gives an evil face at him, but we're not going to do that. We'll point the wand towards the coffin. As you can see, Mayrina's husband is walking again. She never promised he'd be alive. Now make sure you pick the options that say that you're going to keep the wand. Now, we have that wand has become Second Marriage. This is a really sweet wand, as it'll allow us to cast Connor anywhere. He does only last 10 turns though. We can have him hang out with us as we go on our adventures. Nice to have a little extra person along, right? Unfortunately, he's significantly weaker than an actual zombie, but you can keep resummoning him as you like. Usually, you want to do this before combat. One fun way to utilize Connor is to send him into traps and ambushes. That way he can take the damage for you, and then you can just simply resummon him again. A win-win. Go get him, Connor. Oh no, Connor fell. What will we ever do? How about we summon another Connor? Now we shall move on to each class that can become a Necromancer, and do a brief description of what their feel is, and then we'll go into their builds, followed by items at the end of all of this section. Beginning with the OG Necromancer Wizards. These are your quintessential Necromancers. While there are other Necromancer archetypes, the Necromancer Wizard is a classic. With Grim Harvest and their upgraded Animate Dead at level 6, you'll be able to get a little bit of life back and have stronger summons than the others. And at level 10 you get resistance to necrotic damage, which is unfortunate it takes so long to get. It'd been really nice to have in Act 2, for example. Typically, the way you want to play your Necromancer Wizard is you won't really be using necrotic damage for the most part. You'll mostly be relying on magic missiles and other crowd control effects or buff spells to make your minions more effective. Obviously, we need to play as a regular wizard between levels 1 to 5, but once we hit level 6, that's when we really start being able to utilize our summons to the fullest. And using spells such as Magic Missile or Ray of Frost to help secure those kills for our zombies so we can make more zombies, for example. And let's move on to a build. So how do we want to level up our Necromancy Wizard? For the purposes of this video right now, we're just going to do 1 to 12 levels of Necromancy Wizard, and then we'll talk about multi-classing options down the road. I will preface this though, that the Necromancer Wizard in particular really benefits from a 1 level dip of Death Domain Cleric or Fighter just to get that higher armor class available to you, as well as some other defensive mechanisms to help you survive. Because as a Necromancer Wizard, or just a wizard in general, we have very low hit points. See here with the Constitution of 14, we only have 8. So we gotta be very careful to not die. So let's get into the wizard itself. We have plenty of ways to cast spells to help benefit our team. You have a variety of different types of elements you can have at your disposal, and we'll go over some of our cantrips and spells that we want to keep an eye out for. Tying back into our corpse management, we need to make sure we don't end up ruining potential soldiers down the road. So we want to avoid things like fire, lightning, acid, radiant, and, oddly enough, necrotic damage. Because sadly, all of these elements could potentially ruin corpses. That isn't to say that you can't use these elements, you just gotta be sure not to eliminate the target with those elements. So you just gotta be careful of who you're eliminating with your specific spells types. So just quickly looking at our cantrips here, obviously we're going to want to have necromancy cantrips because we are a Necromancer Wizard. We do got to be careful not to wound our corpses though, so just take your favorites here. So Ray of Frost is probably going to be your default spell for the most part. It's a really reliable spell, it can cause ice surfaces, and it is pretty damn good. And you can get a staff pretty early in the Underdark to amplify it. Not to mention that cold damage has a lot of support throughout the game with various items, and we'll get to that at a later point in the video. Poison Spray could have been a phenomenal cantrip for us to have, however, it is very short range, but it is good, respectable damage. And there is a caveat too with poison though, is that there's many creatures that are immune to it, such as undead, which is both a good thing and a bad thing for us. More on that later. Firebolt's a really handy spell because it's really reliable, does pretty solid damage, and it's really long range. However, Ray of Frost will do us just fine. It won't do as much damage as Firebolt, but that's okay. At least we won't ruin our corpses with them. Now, with patch 8, we have access to Bursting Sinew and Toll the Dead. You can grab all 3 of these necromancy cantrips and you'll be just fine, honestly. Because each of them have their perks and benefits and when you might want to utilize them. Bone Chill is really good if you have really high intelligence or whatever your spellcasting modifier is. You have a better chance of hitting them with their armor class. Toll the Dead is a very fantastic spell as well, however it goes against their wisdom saving throws, so we need to be careful of what our targets are weak to. And then Bursting Sinew is fantastic if you have a way to lower their dexterity saving throws, and it can help you get out of a pinch in a situation where you feel like you get overwhelmed and you ran out of spell slots. Simply blow up somebody nearby or throw a corpse out of your pocket at your target and blow them up. But then there's also plenty of other good cantrips here that we could utilize to help us out of combat, such as Friends, so we can have a better chance of persuading things. This is probably a little more important for you if you're doing a solo wizard build, and you won't have another character to handle conversations for us, and obviously we have an abysmal score of 8 charisma, so any benefit we can get to conversations is probably the better. Mage Hand and Minor Illusion both have amazing uses to help acquire things that aren't technically yours. Really, it was yours, they just didn't know it yet. So really, I would highly suggest taking 2 combat abilities Or just go as a spread like this, whatever you just so desire. It doesn't really matter too much, because we'll be able to pick some more later. Here, we'll go with that for now. And as for our level 1 spells, with the wizard, it doesn't really matter too much, considering that any scroll that we acquire throughout the game, we can spend money to scribe it into our spellbook. So long as it's a wizard spell, that is. I tend to look out for spells that are just extremely useful, or spells that I feel like are hard to find on scrolls, or perhaps spells that I don't want to waste using the scroll because I would rather just have the scroll cast it. I absolutely love Thunderwave. 1, it does thunder damage, which is going to be great for our minions. Well, future minions, I should say. 2, it's AoE. And 3, it eats the hell out of our enemies to get them out of your face and potentially knock them off of cliffs and make gravity a thing to consider. Really great spell. Magic Missile is probably one of my favorite, if not my most favorite spell to use to support my undead minions. This is going to be one of the best spells for you to help secure kills on specific targets, namely targets that are suffering the Clawing Gnaw ability to help raise more undead minions, not to mention that you can finish them off safely and use their corpse for future use as well. I would highly suggest taking Shield here so you have a defensive, because you are a squishy little wizard, and any source you can have to potentially make enemies miss you is going to be very nice. Which is another reason why we would also pick up Mage Armor. Unless we multi-class with something like Fighter or Cleric, or perhaps we got a racial bonus to armor proficiencies, we are going to be extremely fragile. So any source of AC, such as this Mage Armor here, will do us quite nicely. And then I also tend to like to pick Find Familiar. However, you can just hold out until you get to the Blighted Village and to the Alchemist Shack, and you can acquire your faithful companion, Shovel. Really good familiar to use throughout the entire game. And then of course there are plenty of great ritual spells here that will help you out throughout the game, which you can acquire early on, but it's always nice to have them early as well, just to get them from the get-go, such as Enhanced Leap or Featherfall so you don't fall, or you can jump around obstacles. Longstride is really nice so you can move around a little quicker. Disguise Self is really good, especially if you end up murdering people and you want to question them later with Speak to the Dead. But then there's also Ray of Sickness, a reliable poison spell, and poison is a really good element for us to use because it won't damage the corpse. Chromatic Orb is also one of my favorite level 1 spells, although I don't use it too often as much as I should, because you can use it to shift it into whatever element you desire. Of course, many of the elements that we can choose with Chromatic Orb are not good for our corpse usage, but sometimes getting that vulnerability on a specific target is quite nice to have. So you can start off with this spread of level 1 spells and you'll do quite nicely for yourself. So you can switch out Ray of Sickness for Ice Knife, a really reliable spell as well. It does a good amount of cold damage. It kind of upcasts a little weirdly, but it's pretty good for you in the early game, as you might have experienced on the receiving end from some early game encounters. Alright, so moving on to our stats. There are, again, many ways you can go about this. I feel like this is a really solid array of your stats for your wizard. So obviously we're not going to be worrying about our strength or our charisma, but we do need to worry about our intelligence, and dexterity and constitution are both incredibly important for us as well. If you do intend on multi-classing with fighter or cleric, and you know you're going to be wearing medium armor or heavy armor, consider lowering your dexterity to 14 and increasing your constitution instead, because maintaining your constitution will help you keep your spells active if you get hit, and also having a high constitution will increase your hit points, which is going to be really nice to have. And obviously as a wizard we want intellect to be at our highest, so you can go with this spread if you so desire. If you don't think you're going to utilize the hag hair, then simply put 2 points into strength so you can help carry a little more stuff for your party. Or if you're wearing heavier armor, that strength will come in handy for you there as well. As for your proficiencies, obviously we're playing a Gale here, and there's not really too many things for them to choose from for the get-go, so it doesn't really matter too much at the end of the day. That is a level 1 wizard. So let's go ahead and move on to level 2 and continue the rest of this build as a pure Necromancer. And again, we'll go over multi-classes at the end of the build. So at level 2, make sure you pick up the Necromancy subclass, which will give us the features of Necromancy Savant. Makes it so that any Necromancy scrolls we find, we can scribe a little bit cheaper. And then we also get an ability called Grim Harvest. Once per turn, if you kill a creature with a spell, you regain hit points equal to twice the spell slots used, and 3 times that if it's a Necromancy spell. And this will also include spells that aren't specific to wizard. It just says necromancy, so things from druid or cleric, for example, will give us extra hit points based on whatever that spell level is. It's not an incredible amount of healing, but it's still healing nonetheless, and maybe this might save you. Probably not. It's just a meager amount of hit points at the end of the day, but it's just a nice perk, some cool flavor. We also get to pick more level 1 spells, pick whatever you desire. I'm just going to pick random ritual spells here. And again, we can always pick up stuff later from scribing. You could also decide to switch things out. Obviously, we have some spells that we scribed from earlier in this playthrough, so don't mind any of these other higher level spells. Okay, moving on to level 3, we get access to level 2 spells. There are plenty of good level 2 spells here. So this is when things start becoming a little more interesting in terms of how we can build our character. One of my favorite early game spells is Cloud of Daggers. It's a really, really reliable source of consistent AoE damage. It is a concentration spell, meaning that we'll be able to cast it and it will be up remaining for several turns in one spot for this specific spell. Really good if you can put us in a choke and keep your enemies nearby and making them keep standing in it. You can also shove people back into it with your shove ability or Thunder Wave or even Eldritch Blast. Really good spell to use. You're probably going to use this spell quite often. Then you have spells such as Old Person, which is pretty solid as well, although I usually don't have my wizards cast it. I usually have my clerics do that because I like to use more AoE type spells. Then there's beneficial spells such as Misty Step and Invisibility. We don't see invisibility here because I scribed it. Knock is a really good ability as well, so if you say you don't have a lockpicker in your party, you can go ahead and use this knock spell and you'll be able to pretty much unlock most locks in the game, although it does require a spell slot, so there is that. Shatter is another really good early game AoE spell. It's an AoE thunder spell, which thunder is a damage type that we like, and it's really reliable. Pretty damn good spell. Then of course there are other elemental spells such as Melf's Acid Arrow, as well as Scorching Ray. Both of these are good spells in their own right, but we kind of tend to want to stay away from these type of spells so we don't damage our future soldiers. And at level 4, this is when we get another cantrip. Pick whatever you desire at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Shocking Grasp, while it is a lightning spell, is a very good get out of jail free card, so to speak, as you can cast it on somebody and they won't be able to react to you, meaning you'll be able to run away from them. You'll have advantage on if it's a creature wearing metal or are made of metal. Pretty good spell to have in emergencies, but we're going to go with just a Necromancy spell here. Then we get even more level 2 spells. We'll do Misty Step, and we'll do Mirror Image for a defensive spell. Now, as for our feats, there aren't too many things that are super crazy for your Necromancer Wizard to look out for, other than your ability score improvement. Simply increasing your intelligence by 2. Or you can pick up the Warcaster feat so we can get advantage on our concentration throws. But there's also another feat that many people are very big fans of, and that is the Dual Wielder feat. This will allow you to wield 2 weapons in each of your hands, even if they aren't light, and you gain a +1 AC bonus while wielding a melee weapon in each hand. However, they can't have the 2-handed weapon property. So why would we want to have this on our wizard? We're not going to be smacking people in melee. Well, that's not the point. The point here is that we're going to be wielding 2 different staves. So as you can see here, we have the lovely Necromancer staff, Cheris Necromancy. We could pair that with another lovely staff, such as Marco Heskier, or whatever staff you so desire. Really good feat to have, especially if you're trying to really power game and get the more oomph out of all of your magical items. But for the simplicity of the build, we're just going to go into intelligence. Okay, so now we're at level 5. We'll get access to level 3 spells. And this is, again, where wizards really start to come up on top. We get access to a slew of amazing abilities here. We'll get Counterspell, so we can protect our team and, more importantly, our minions. Glyph of Warding, which is one of my favorite spells. It's a big AoE, and you can morph whatever element you'd like to have with it. Fireball is always a classic, but it does fire damage and it will hurt our allies. I guess so does Glyph of Warding, but at least with Glyph of Warding we can change the element to preserve as many bodies as we can. Lightning Bolt is a really good AoE, but it's lightning, so we're not going to be worrying about it. There's Haste as well. I think we have it learned, so you don't see it here at the moment. We do have access to Animate Dead right away. However, I usually hold off on this because we'll be able to get this for free at level 6. And and we'll show that in a second. Sinking Cloud's actually kind of nice considering it's basically a poison ability, and once we start getting our undead minions, we can just slap this on the field to be a control spell, and our undead minions won't be affected by it. But for the purposes of this build, we're just going to go with Counterspell and Glyph of Warding here at level 5. Use Counterspell to protect ourselves and our soldiers, as well as Glyph of Warding to help manipulate whatever element we might need at a particular time. So now we're at level 6, and this is when things really start becoming interesting for our Necromancer Wizard. We automatically will get Animate Dead for free, if we didn't already have it. But more importantly, we're going to be able to raise an additional minion whenever we summon any variant of our Animate Dead. Whether it's rank 1, upcasted to level a 4 spell, so we can have, instead of 3 minions, we'll have 4. And then once we get to 5th level spells, we can summon 2 ghouls, whether they're grounded or flying. And then when we get 6th level spells, we can summon 4 ghouls or 4 flying ghouls. But beyond that, creatures used from Animate Dead will have extra hit points based on your wizard level, as well as get your proficiency bonus added to their damage. So 6 levels of Necromancer is a phenomenal spot to be in, and this might be a spot where you consider multi-classing into something else, whether it be Death Cleric, Spore Druid, whatever it may be. 6 levels of Necromancer will do you good, because no matter what, you're going to be able to get that proficiency bonus, and you'll be able to get that extra damage even if you multi-class in other things, because your proficiency bonus isn't tied to your class, it's tied to your level. The HP for your level, it's only going to be 6 extra hit points compared to a 12 level Necromancer Wizard versus a 6, so I wouldn't worry about the health part of side of things. Then you can pick whatever spells you desire here. We already have a few spells scribed, so we're just going to go with Vampiric Touch here, and we'll go with Sinking Cloud just to stay on theme. Alright, at level 7 we get access to 4th level spells. These spells are okay. Some of them are kind of situational. Others can just be, fairly well-rounded and multi-purpose. One of my favorite spells for damaging is Ice Storm. It is a 2-sided sword, so to speak. It won't hurt our corpses, which is phenomenal, but the semi-downside and plus side of this spell is that it will cover the area in ice, which is great to help provide crowd control against enemies, so they might potentially slip. However, undead minions tend to have really awful dexterity saves, so your zombies and ghouls are going to be sliding all over the place. It's really funny to see, so honestly just grab Ice Storm anyways and just throw it out. If your minions slip and slide, well, that's on them for not learning how to ice skate. We also have access to Blight here. It's an okay spell. There are a few times when you can actually utilize this to its full effect here. As you see, plants will take maximum damage from it. There are some plants in Act 2 that you could utilize this on, although they do have necrotic resistance, so that'll be really handy for the Death Domain Cleric. The spell as itself for your wizard, I personally would not really take it unless you have no other options, or if you really want to have it, it's totally fine. I tend to skip this spell, and I'll go in favor of something like Conjure Minor Elemental, just get some more elementals on the battlefield, and more summons on the battlefield for that matter. Otherwise, you could take Dimension Door or Greater Invisibility, but again, all these spells you can always find in-game, and you can just scribe it for yourself. But we're going to go, for this level, we're going to go with Ice Storm and our Conjure Minor Elemental. Okay, at Wizard level 8, we can take another feat here. By this point in the game, we probably have access to plenty of good weapons, so you can obviously go up to 20 in intelligence if you're not already. If you had the Hex here and started with 17 intelligence, you could already be here. And that +1 to dispel DC could be useful, might not be, it's up to you really. But I think at this point in the game, I think picking up dual wielding is very nice to have. Obviously, if you're playing a solo character, you'd probably already have Alert, but Alert's a phenomenal ability as well. You get +5 initiative and you can't be surprised. And as a solo character, that is almost mandatory on some fights, because if you're surprised, and you have a very slim chance of surviving the round before you could even take a turn. But assuming that you're not solo, and you might already have 20 intelligence, or that 20 intelligence isn't as a priority just yet, go ahead and pick up the dual wielder feat and wield as whatever stabs you so desire. And as for spells, just pick whatever you like here. We'll get Blight and Invisibility, why not? I guess you also don't have to pick a higher level spell. You can always pick a spell you missed before that you weren't able to find through scrolls. But anyhow, I digress. At level 9, we get access to 5th level spells. There are two spells here that I really like picking most of the time, such as Cone of Cold, which is a big AoE frost spell, and then Conjure Elemental to summon a variety of elementals to help fight for you. And once you have 6 level spell slots, that Conjure Elemental spell will net you the ability to also conjure even more powerful elementals in the Myrmidons. Two great spells to have. Also available at this level that we don't currently possess in our spellbook here because we already have it learned is Cloud Kill. This is probably my absolute favorite spell to use as a Necromancer. Sure, it's conjuration, but who cares? It's a literal war crime. You just nuke an area full of toxic gas, and you can move it around each turn, and each time you apply it, it will do damage immediately, and at the beginning of the enemy's turn, they'll take some poison damage. And the best part of this about this spell is all of your undead minions are immune to it. So feel free to just throw Cloud Kill on all of your enemy targets and your minions will be just fine. Really fun spell to use. So that's definitely a spell I would pick here, but obviously we already had it described. So we obviously went with Cone of Cold and Conjure Elemental. Okay, at level 10, Necromancer, we get access to Inured to Death, which will allow us to get resistance to necrotic damage ourselves, and then our maximum hit points can't be reduced. That doesn't come up too often in Baldur's Gate 3. There are a few spells in the game that will do that, such as Harm, but I think only a handful of enemies in the game that actually use that spell, so this passive feature isn't that crazy for us. And then you can pick another cantrip here. We're going to go with Shocking Grasp because we don't already have it. And then just pick whatever 5th level spells you sort of die. We'll go with Telekinesis and Dominate Person. Why not? Okay, now we're at level 11, meaning we have 6th level spell slots. And there are some pretty powerful spells here. Some that you might want to utilize, some you might not. It's all up to you. Global Vulnerability is fantastic to help protect you and your allies. Makes everybody immune to that. It is a concentration spell, so you might consider using something else if you so desire. Then we got spells like Disintegrate, which is basically, hey, you die. Doing a metric butt ton of force damage. This will probably help you defeat the final boss in the game. Create Undead is pretty cool. Lets you summon a mummy. Nothing too crazy there, but if you are utilizing a party that does a lot of fear type tactics, Create Undead for the mummy is really nice because they do get a lot of bonuses from enemies that are afraid. Chain Lightning is obviously a very powerful spell, but it does lightning damage, so be wary with that. And then we also get two lovely frost spells with Wall of Ice and Autoluke's Freezing Sphere. Both do considerable amounts of frost damage, and Wall of Ice is pretty cool because you can kind of mess around with the terrain and do some crazy stuff there. Be careful though, because it might wreck your frames per second there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which of these spells you pick, because they're all really good in some way or fashion. And then we also have access to some other level 6 spells that we already had described, such as Circle of Death, an AoE Necromancy spell, pretty damn solid. I wouldn't really utilize it too much with your 6th level spell slot, since you're most likely going to be using that to summon your undead. But once you get access to this particular staff here, you'll be able to essentially cast this spell for free very often. So pick whatever you desire. You could pick that AoE Necromancy spell, but I'm going to pick Disintegrate and Create Undead because we already have that spell, honestly. Alright, and at level 12, you get another feat here. We're going to just round out our intelligence. And pick whatever spells you so desire. We're just going to go ahead and pick up both of these frost spells. Again, you can acquire those scrolls in the future time and pick up whatever spell you're missing. Alright, and that's essentially the build for the Necromancer Wizard. It's pure 12 levels of Necromancy Wizard.
Fate dost thou require as thou.
Otherwise, as for multi-classing options, again, the two obvious ones at level 1 would be to multi-class it with Fighter, so you can get access to heavy armor, shields, and all of that good stuff. But more importantly, we'll be able to get proficient in Constitution saving throws, meaning that we'll always have a +2 extra to our concentration checks. Very, very good for any caster, not just the Necromancer Wizard. If you do decide to go multi-class into Fighter, I highly suggest getting 2 levels of it at least. That way you can get Action Surge, so you can, on certain boss fights or whatever it might be, you can use Action Surge to cast 2 spells that you normally wouldn't be able to. Otherwise, another really good choice would be the Death Domain Cleric, which we'll go over in just a moment. If you do end up multi-classing into Cleric for your Necromancy Wizard, I would highly suggest a spread of this: 14 Dexterity, 16 Constitution, 16 Intelligence, 12 Wisdom, and 8 Charisma. We only want a little bit of Wisdom, just so we can get access to a couple of our spell slots, but we're not really here for the spells. We want to grab our Intelligence and our Constitution as high as possible, so we can cast the most effective spells with our Wizard spells, and Constitution so we can get more hit points and maintain concentration on our saving throws. And we have a 14 in Dexterity because the Cleric, the Death Domain Cleric, can wear medium armor, and that will mean that only 14 of our Dexterity will actually go towards our AC. Obviously, there are some armors that completely ignore that, and you can have as much Dexterity if you so desire, but I really value having high Constitution on my Clerics and Casters in general, so we can maintain our powerful concentration spells. Should you play as Gale, though, for your Necromancy Wizard, and you want to give him a 1-level dip of Death Domain Cleric, you have to pick a deity, and for fun, I'd like to pick Mistra just because, you know, spoilers. But the other reason we want to have the Death Domain Cleric is not just for the lovely Cleric spells we get, but also the subclass feature to cast any Necromancy cantrip that has only one target to hit another target. Really good to help maximize your potential damage by your Necromancer. And then I'll show you what spells we want to consider for our 1-level dip for our Necromancer. So considering that we're not going to have the highest Wisdom, I probably would not use Inflict Wounds. If you did decide to go with 6 levels of Death Domain Cleric and 6 levels of Wizard, perhaps you might have a much higher Wisdom, in which case Inflict Wounds would be really good there. However, spells that don't require high Wisdom to utilize would be Healing Word, which is a fantastic healing spell to use as a bonus action, and as a Wizard, we don't have a ton of ways to utilize our bonus actions, so that would be really good there. Bless would also be really good to help with your party members, or perhaps certain minions or zombies land their attacks more often and be able to get that Clawing Gnaw effect running. So I would probably end up using Healing Word and Bless. Of course, you can go with Inflict Wounds if you so desire, but we're not going to have the highest Wisdom here on this specific build, so you might not be able to hit things very often. But it does a good chunk of damage if you can land it. Let's go ahead and move on to the Death Domain Cleric. Now, if you want your Necromancy to be blessed by a dark deity, the Death Domain Cleric is where it's at. Starting at level 1, we'll already be dishing out some extra damage since we can essentially double cast our cantrips on 2 separate targets, though they have to be Necromancy. Honestly, this alone makes the Death Cleric a phenomenal 1-level dip for any Necromancer you're going to be playing as, whether it's a Wizard, a Druid, you name it. And the level 6 feature is really nice as we can ignore Necrotic Resistance, which comes online around Act 2, which is pretty damn nice. However, Shades in Act 2 are still completely immune to them. At the end of the day, we still are a Cleric, so we have plenty of healing spells and Radiant spells as well to help aid our party and also eliminate those threats that are immune to Necrotic altogether. Now let's go over the build for the Death Domain Clerics, the newest Cleric subclass added in patch 8, and this one is probably my favorite Cleric subclass on tabletop. So let's go a little more in depth on here compared to the other build where we just lightly talked about it. So at level 1 we get to cast our cantrips twice, or our Necromancy cantrips, and you probably end up going with a spread like this, picking up Bursting Sinew, Guidance, and Toll the Dead, because we also get offered another Necromancy cantrip here, in which we'll take Bone Chill. Normally Bone Chill is not available to Clerics, and both Bursting Sinew and Toll the Dead always are, so we want to make sure we pick these spells here for our cantrips so we can get Chill Touch. Otherwise, spells such as Resistance would be very useful to have because they affect many skill checks throughout the game, as well as having access to Sacred Flame for a semi-reliable source of radiant damage. There are some times we might want to utilize it, but as a Death Domain Cleric, we're going to tend to stick to the necrotic side of things. And for our stat spread here, this is probably a fairly reliable stat spread for your Death Domain Cleric. 12 Strength, 14 Dex, 16 Constitution, 8 Intelligence, 16 Wisdom, and 8 Charisma. 14 Dex because we're going to be able to use medium armor, so 14 Dex is typically the most we'll be able to get applied to our AC there. Obviously you can go higher Dexterity if you so desire, but again, I really value having high Constitution in my casters, so that way we can maintain concentration on our powerful concentration spells. And there are a few different ways to build your Death Domain Cleric. You can go 6 levels of Death Domain Cleric with 6 levels of Necromancer Wizard if you so desire. Or you can multi-class 6 levels of Death Domain Cleric and 6 levels of Spore Druid, and that'll be a pretty damn good combination because they both just use Wisdom. However, you won't have access to higher level spells with either of those classes, so that is something to consider, but you'll get a lot of really cool minions and other effects from the Spore Druid, which we'll cover in just a moment. Other fun options include combining with Fighter for Action Surge, or maybe even Monk to really get some oomph out of your Shadowheart. I have a video going over it, which combines 6 levels of Death Domain Cleric with 6 levels of Shadow Monk. Really fun way to play, but for the purpose of this guide, we're going to go with 12 levels of Death Domain Cleric, and honestly, that is phenomenal. It's a very powerful class to be as a pure level 12 class. Most likely this is going to be your stat spread. If you did end up wanting to go with the Hag's Hair route from Auntie Ethel, go ahead and lower your strength to 10 and bump your wisdom to 17. But assuming that you're going to be using this for Shadowheart, we're going to just keep this spread because most people use the hair on their main character. Anyways, let's move on to level 2. At level 2 from our Death Domain Cleric, we get to have a channel divinity called Touch of Death, which does a pretty solid amount of necrotic damage whenever we deal damage to an enemy with a melee attack. Now the Cleric is very straightforward when it comes to leveling, considering there aren't really many options you need to really consider, because the way that the Cleric spell list works is that you can interchange your spells whenever you want, because you have all of them learned at any time. You just have to switch which spells you are prepared with. And we'll go over each Cleric spell that we're going to consider for each level once we get to the end of our Cleric levels here. So at level 3, we get access to level 2 Cleric spells. Most of them are okay. Some of them are situational, but they're still nice to have. Most of the time you use your second level spell slot to upcast your first level spell slot if you wanted to go that route. Alright, so at level 4 we get access to another cantrip. I'm going to take Resistance here just to help maintain higher skill checks in certain points in the game. And then we come to feats. So obviously I advocate for your ability score improvement. Really nice to go. Just get higher DCs on your spells, which is really great, especially for the Cleric because they have a lot of really powerful control spells and some damage spells. So having that high wisdom will be phenomenal for us. Otherwise, you can go with things like Warcaster to get advantage on your saving throws, or if you want to add more to your Constitution saving throws, such as maintaining concentration, perhaps you would consider getting Resilient Constitution. All of these are great options to go with, but for simplicity's sakes, we're just going to go with ability improvement to increase our wisdom. At level 5, this is when we get access to really powerful level 3 Cleric spells. We get access to Destroy Undead. Whenever you successfully turn an undead creature, it also takes 4 to 24 radiant damage. I forgot to mention earlier, but at level 2 from our Cleric, we get the feature to Turn Undead here. Let's go ahead and exit out so you can showcase that. And again, you get this at level 2, Turn Undead. It'll use your Channel Divinity, and you'll pray to turn all undead you see, which will make any affected entity must move away from you. Basically, you scare them. You scare undead. And then once you get level 5, you'll be able to do damage to them too. Moving on to level 6, this is where Death Domain Cleric really starts to shine, especially when about this time that you get to around Act 2. Spells you cast ignore resistance to necrotic damage. So if you're utilizing your necrotic spells, you can make those enemies that are typically resistant to it be able to take full damage. However, there are some enemies in Act 2 that are completely immune to necrotic damage. Sadly, this doesn't affect them, so they'll still be immune. Alright, Cleric level 7, we get access to 4th level spells. These are some pretty powerful spells as well. Nothing super crazy to write home about, but it's still pretty nice to have. Level 8, we get another feat. Obviously, I'm a big advocate for ability score improvement. However, you might consider getting Warcaster or Resilient Constitution. You could also go with Dual Wielder if you wanted to go that route, but I usually like to have that on my Necromancers, give them a more unique feel. Usually with my Clerics, I like to keep my shield on, because there are some pretty sweet shields in the game that just feel right using as a Cleric, you know? So, to make it simple, we're just going to go with Wisdom, round it out. Alright, at level 9, we get access to 5th level spells. A lot of really powerful spells here for us, especially my favorite spell, Cloud Kill. At level 10, our Cleric gets the ability to have Divine Intervention. These are really cool, and they only can be used once per game. Although there are some ways to cheese around it, but they're pretty powerful things you can do. And as for our other cantrip we can pick, I'm going to take Sacred Flame here just to get some source of reliable, quote-unquote, reliable radiant damage. Okay, now we're level 11, and we have access to 6th level spells. Some pretty solid spells here. We'll cover in a moment. And at level 12 we'll pick our last feat here. We're just going to go ahead and pick up our Warcaster if we didn't already have it. Okay, and as for our spell list here, again, clerics can pick and choose any of these spells as they so desire, just as long as they're in between combat. So you don't have to worry about choosing a specific spell at each level up. Spells that are really nice to have in the level 1 spell bracket is Inflict Wounds, really nice burst damage on a specific target, especially with our ability to ignore resistance against it. Healing Word is perhaps one of the best healing spells in the game, not necessarily because of how much it heals, but because it's utilized as a bonus action. That way you can use your actions for other things, such as attacking or using more powerful spells or cantrips, and you can use this as a bonus action to help keep people alive. You could also throw a potion as an action and then use a bonus action to heal somebody as well, so you can kind of get your party back up if they all fell down. Shield of Faith is a neat way to increase your armor class, not too shabby. Bless is very useful to make your party, yourself, and perhaps your zombie minions a higher chance to attack your targets. Rather, land their attacks on their targets so they can apply things like Clawing Gnaw to help get that zombie snowball rolling. Bane is also a decent ability as well, although I tend to value Bless more because usually targets aren't going to be alive long enough for Bane to get its full effect. But it can be used in a pinch to help make it so enemies are less likely to hit you. Command is a fairly underappreciated spell. I mean, obviously people know about it for the very early game shenanigans on the Nautiloid, with Command Drop to make the demon drop his sword, but you can use this to make pretty much any enemy in the game drop their weapon and make them a lot more competent in combat because they'll be unarmed instead of using their beefy weapon. Command Grovel is really good too, since you can make enemies fall prone and give basically an advantage to all of your allies and undead minions. Create Water or Destroy Water can be very nice in combination with lightning spells or your cold spells even. So you might actually consider this with this build because you can allow your wizard or whoever to amplify your damage from the wet condition that's made by Create Water. Alright, moving on to level 2 spells. Really the only two that I usually use a ton is Spiritual Weapon and Prayer of Healing out of combat. Spiritual Weapon will make a weapon form nearby, which you can control. It does pretty reliable damage if it lands its attack. However, its movement is very small in this little circle here. That's all it can move every turn. So hopefully you can keep it near your enemy so that way they can keep on attacking. Lesser Healing is a nice way to get healing out of combat to help heal your party if they took a bunch of damage. Lesser Restoration can be useful, but I never really use it that often. Hold Person's actually a really good spell if you're a cleric to use, because they tend to be more of a support character. Put this on an enemy humanoid, and they will be paralyzed, making your melee allies, or your zombies, for example, automatically crit that target. Very, very good ability to use. Everything else here is just okay. Aid is good, but it's better when you upcast it to a higher level. This will increase your allies and their maximum hit points by 5. And this will apply to all your undead minions, so you probably would be using Aid quite often, although again, you might want to upcast that. Moving on to level 3 spells, this is where things get a lot of fun. We get access to Glyph of Warding, as I mentioned before, a very, very versatile AoE spell. Really, really great spell. We'll just go ahead and showcase it here so you guys can actually see it. Really nice AoE here. We can just plop the glyph down and whoever triggers it will make it explode. So if you can just drop it on an enemy, it'll explode immediately. And we get access to Acid, Cold, Fire, Lightning, Thunder, Detonation, which will knock people back, and then Sleep as well. But there are dex saves associated with each of these. And if they resist the dex saves on the Detonation and the Sleep, nothing will happen to them. If they save on the dex saves on any of the other elements, they will take half damage. Really good spell. But of course, we're here for Spirit Guardians as a cleric. This will create an aura, whether it's necrotic or radiant. Both of these have their purposes. You'll probably end up using both of them. And the fact that we can ignore necrotic resistance, maybe you lean towards the necrotic side of things. However, we'd be remiss to not mention how powerful radiant spells are in the game, not necessarily because of the damage type. Granted, it is a really good damage type and there are plenty of things that are vulnerable to it, but there are a lot of really good items in the game that will actually support a radiant spell playstyle, because there's a lot of buffs that you get from casting radiant spells. Not so much with necrotic, unfortunately. It'll create this aura around you of either angels or I think bats. Let's go ahead and cast the necrotic version of it since we are a Death Domain cleric after all. And all these will just keep floating around us, and we can walk around in combat and it will hit things. And we're free to go ahead and do other stuff as we're concentrating on it. Really, really, really good spell. Both on tabletop and here in Baldur's Gate. Speak with the Dead is a pretty decent spell. However, you would never really have to cast this because there are ways to get that for free, whether through the necklace that you get in Act 1 or reading Necromancy of Thay, so I never really picked this up. Revivify. This is a way to resurrect your party members and not use your Scrolls of Resurrection anymore. Pretty cool, but it does expend a spell slot. Remove Curse. This is actually a really good spell to use on certain fights, and on Honor Mode in particular. There's a fight in the Act 3 that you can use this on the enemy and it kind of negates their special ability. Mass Healing Word is pretty decent as well. It's an AoE heal. Pretty large radius, as you can see here. And it will bonus action heal everybody. This could be really good if your party took a ton of damage and many members are fallen and are crying for help. Then you also have Bestow Curse. This is a fun necromancy spell that can give a variety of curses. I don't actually use this as much as I should, mostly because it only attacks, but you can do some funny things to them. There's all kinds of debilitating curses for all varieties of saving throws. Moving on to level 4 spells, we have Guardian of the Faith. This is probably the more powerful level 4 spell we get. This will summon a giant angel-like creature. Go ahead and just cast it here just so you can see. Any enemy that comes into this radius will immediately take damage, and every time this Guardian of Faith does damage, it will lose health based on that damage. So typically you don't even get 3 strikes. If an enemy hits one of your allies within this circle, the Guardian of Faith will smite them, essentially, and then again lose that damage that they deal to that target. I do want to mention though that since we are Deathdomain Cleric, we always have specific spells always available to us, no matter what we have on our spellcasting bar. Level 1 spells, we have access to Ray of Sickness and False Life. Decent ways to give yourself life, I suppose, and also deal poison damage. Level 2 spells, we get Ray of Enfeeblement and Blindness. I never utilize these ever, but you can make somebody blind or you can make somebody weaker. Whoop-de-doo. Level 3 spells that we always have prepared is Vampiric Touch and Animate Dead. Really nice spells to have. Vampiric Touch is really cool because it's a concentration spell, and we can just keep smacking people and draining their life. Really good if you're a solo player. If you're 1v1, that is. Otherwise, it's most likely more useful for you to do an AoE spell. Then obviously, Animate Dead's going to be really good for us. We won't have as many minions as the Necromancer, but we can still upcast these spells and get 3 corpses to fight for us. Level 4 spells, we get access to Blight for free, as well as Death Ward. Moving on to 5th level spells, we get access to Insect Plague, which is a really good spell, AoE. Good concentration spell. But more importantly, we get access to Cloud Kill, my favorite spell in the game. Let's go commit war crimes. Unless you just want to make people suffer the wrath of insects. You just put a plague around there and it's just like other AoE spells. However, it does make enemies suffer difficult terrain because it will take them longer to move through it. And also, it will impose disadvantage on perception checks. Whoop-de-doo. I guess it could help you keep your stealth characters nearby in stealth longer. And then moving on to level 6, we'll have access to Blade Barrier, Create Undead, Harm, and Planar Ally. All of these are really good spells. Oh, and Feast of Heroes Feast too. Once you summon your giant army, you can use Heroes Feast to increase hit points of everybody, as well as make them immune to being poisoned, diseased, or frightened. Frightened is the main one that we want to worry about here because there are plenty of enemies in the game that actually make our undead scared, usually through the effects of turning or other weird necromancy abilities. Planar Ally is actually a really fun summoning spell, as it'll let us summon a Genie, a Diva, or a Cambion, all of it which have their own different abilities, and it's just nice to have another summon. Create Undead is just like the wizard version, and will let us to make a mummy to fight with us. If we're not utilizing fear, I really wouldn't really recommend it too much, but it is still another body at the end of the day. And then Blade Barrier is actually a really fun spell. You summon a wall of blades. That's concentration, and anything that passes through it will get obliterated, including your minions, so be careful. As you can see. Pretty fun spell. Looks really cool. Good times. And again, to just touch base real quick before we move on to the next class, multi-classing options for your Deathdomain Cleric would be Would obviously be going 6 levels of Death Domain Cleric, so that way you can negate resistance to necrotic damage. You could pair this really well with the Spore Druid or the Wizard. The Wizard's probably the better option of the two, just because the Wizard can do the scribing cheese, so to speak, and be able to access higher level Wizard spells. Spore Druid is really nice in this combination because they both share the same spellcasting stat, so you don't have to worry about having to fight between Intelligence and Wisdom. And then there are some other fun builds you can utilize that aren't a other caster class, such as the Shadow Monk or Fighter or Rogue, or just all kinds of builds. But I would highly suggest either being a pure 12 levels of Cleric, or you can combine it with some kind of martial character, especially if you're doing a fun build for Shadowheart. Ranger could also be a sweet option too, to also get you a few more spell casting slots, and also get you extra attacks, so you can do some stuff there too. And that's ultimately the Death Domain Cleric. I hope you guys enjoy it. It's one of my favorite subclasses to play as, and one of my favorite dips for my Necromancer Wizard. Now we move on to the Spore Druid. Probably one of the more underrated versions of the Necromancy type characters, as I'm pretty sure most people haven't even played one yet. They are a lot of fun. Spore Druids are weird, nasty, and perfect if you like your Necromancy to be a little more organic. Halo of Spores punishes anything that gets too close, although you can use the Halo of Spores as an offensive reaction. Symbiotic Entity turns into a melee bruiser, or range bruiser, as Symbiotic Entity will give you temporary hit points based on your level, and any other weapon you strike with will deal extra necrotic damage, whether it's melee or ranged. So there is a lot of really good Spore Druid multi-class damage rider potential. Now let's just get into the builds. Moving on to the Spore Druid. Now, Druids, I honestly think, are one of the more underrated classes in the game. They are extraordinarily versatile, and they are a really fun playstyle, especially in the early game of Act 1 with all the Druid interactions. And Spore Druid in particular is really powerful as well. So one thing to note about Druids is that they can be just as tanky as Clerics. They both wear medium armor, and they get a lot of the same spells, and Druids have a lot of lovely spells that only they get. And there's some really powerful concentration spells there, as well as some pretty neat cantrips too. And speaking of cantrips, we're going to go ahead and start there, with the first one being Shillelagh. This will make it so your staff or club becomes magical and will deal extra bludgeoning damage based on your spellcasting ability. So now we don't have to worry about dexterity or strength, we can just focus all of our skill points into wisdom. And then for our secondary cantrip, you can have guidance here as well, so you don't need to have a cleric to give you guidance. And then there's also Thorn Whip, which is a really fun pull ability. Pretty cool stuff here. So I would either, if you don't already have guidance in your party, I would suggest picking up guidance in Shillelagh. Otherwise, take Shillelagh and Thorn Whip. And as for your stat spread, it's going to pretty much be the same as your clerics. And because we are a druid, we still have access to shapeshifting, meaning that our physical stats don't matter too much, because whenever we shapeshift into another animal, we'll gain their physical stats, meaning their strength, dexterity, and constitution. So we can pile more stuff into our intelligence, wisdom, and charisma if we so desire. However, since we are a Spore Druid, we have an alternate way to use our shapeshifting ability. So a spread of 12 strength, 14 dex, 16 constitution, 8 intelligence, 16 wisdom, and 8 charisma will do you quite nicely. If this is going to be your main character, perhaps you might consider getting 17 wisdom and utilize Ethel's hair if you so desire there. Otherwise, this spread will be just fine. Let's go ahead and move on to our level 2, and we'll get going. Moving on to level 2, this is where we get to pick our subclass, and we're going to take Circle of Spores. So as mentioned, we still have our wild shapes here. We have all these lovely animals that we can still turn into, which you still need to consider using, because there are some cool spots in the game that you can only access if you have a cat. But there's some alternate ways to get around things from being a cat. You can just jump through different spots in the game. It's really cool. So the fact that we can still shapeshift even as a Spore Druid is really nice. However, again, as I mentioned, we have Spore abilities with our Symbiotic Entity. This will use our wild shape charge, so we have to consider when we want to use this versus going into an animal. Most of the time, we're going to end up using our Symbiotic Entity, because we get a lot of cool bonuses from it. One, we get temporary hit points that will, for every level of our Druid, basically. And then while this shield is active, any attack we deal in melee will deal 1 to 6 necrotic damage. Then we can also cast Halo Spores with double damage. And Halo Spores is this ability right here, which we can use as a reaction with anybody that's in our aura. Unleash a cloud of necrotic spores upon a target. This uses a reaction, so other reactions won't trigger this turn. So things like shield or attacks of opportunity, you won't be able to take those. So it's a cool way to use your reaction offensively, but you won't be able to access your reactions for defensive purposes. So be careful when you use that spell. And then also, by just being a Circle of Spores Druid, we'll be getting Bone Chill for free. Then we also get prepared spells, just like the Cleric. And there are some different spells here that we can decide to go with. Obviously, you can switch and choose these as you so desire. For just level 1 purposes, though, we're going to be similar to the Cleric. We're going to take Healing Ward. We'll take Ice Knife, Thunder Wave, Good Berry, which is a really good way to make alternate source of healing. And at the end of the day, if you still have spell slots, you can convert these into good berries, and each of these good berries can be used as supplies when you do try to take a long rest. Pretty sweet. But we're also going to go with Speak with Animals. We are druids after all. But there are some other good options here, such as Fairy Fire, to give advantage on all of your enemies, which would be really good for all of your minions. Okay, at druid level 3, we get access to second level spells here. Some pretty solid spells actually, with Moonbeam, one of my favorite early game concentration spells. You can just a channel of a pillar of sunlight, or moonlight rather, that you can move around on the battlefield, and anything that walks through it will take radiant damage. Be careful you don't run into it yourself, because it'll hurt. You also get access to Flame Blade, which will make a magical weapon that will use your wisdom modifier to attack, and it will deal extra fire damage. Pretty damn cool to use. And then one of my favorite area of effect abilities, Spike Growth. You make this giant area covered in spikes, and anybody that walks through it walks a lot slower and takes damage for each step they take. A very, very, very fun spell to utilize. And then especially if enemies keep trying to run out of it, you can use other ways to either pull them back in with Thorn Whip, or you can push them with things like Thunder Wave. Or if you just want to be fucking cool, just use Flame Blade. All good stuff indeed. However, you do have to note that the druids don't have extra attacks, so if you do want to do some fun min-maxy stuff with the symbiotic entity necrotic damage, you can also do stuff with Flame Blade and maybe some kind of martial class to get that extra attack. But more multi-classing later down the road. For now, we move to level 4 and we get another cantrip. We'll take guidance here since we didn't take it at level 1. Otherwise, you could take Produce Flame, which is okay. It's kind of cool. It's more fun on tabletop than it is here. Or you can take Resistance, whichever you so desire, whatever you feel like you're missing. And then we get our feats. Obviously, I'm going to advocate for a Wisdom, but obviously, just like the Cleric, we might consider Warcaster or Resilient Constitution. You could also go with Dual Wielder if you want, but it's all up to you. I'm going to go with Wisdom here. Shocker, right? Alright. At level 5, we get extra attack on our Druid Shapeshift forms, which is something to consider. We also get access to level 3 spells here. We get Call of Lightning, which is a really good channeled spell, which is a really good concentration spell that you can cast every turn. Really reliable source of damage, although it is lightning, so be cautious of that. All these other spells are mostly here for... Oh my god. All these other spells here are kind of niche. I don't really utilize them too often. I do use Light in Act 2 though. But really the only thing I would use here is Call Lightning. But you also get access to Animate Dead and Gaseous Form. I never use that though. Level 6 we get access to the Panther and Owlbear forms, which I still think is kind of weird. I think that the Moon Druid should be the only ones that have those. But hey, I'm not going to say no to those. But the more important and interesting part of the level 6 Spore Druid is that we get Fungal Infestation. We can raise little fungal zombies, which function almost identical to the zombies we get from Animate Dead. However, we can target beasts from this as well. So make sure you collect as many of those little squirrels and birds and whatever other tiny beast creature you can find. Because we can utilize these for Spore Druids, rather than using the humanoids for our other Animate Dead targets. They are a little bit weaker though in terms of their health, but they still do the same amount of damage, and they will also convert other enemies into zombies as well. Although they will create regular zombies rather than fungal zombies. At level 7, we get access to level 4 Druid, and level 4 Druid spells are really damn good. We get Ice Storm, just like the other ones. We get Conjure Woodland Being, which is one of the best summoning spells in the game. It'll summon a Dryad, which will have other abilities on its own, but beyond that, the Wood Druid can also summon a target. The Dryad can also summon its own minion, a Wood Woad. So basically it's a 2-for-1 summoning spell. Pretty damn good. And They really work well together and work well with your minions. You also get Conjure Fire Elemental. Pretty sweet to just get another body on board. You also get Wall of Fire, which is a really good concentration spell, but be careful and use this if you're not really concerned about harming your future soldiers. Alright, level 8. We're going to go ahead and pick up Warcaster here, just because I really love Druid concentration spells. Really good thing to have. However, I could really advocate as well, now that I'm thinking about it, because since we do still have our Shapeshift forms, Tavern Brawler now actually works with our Druid forms. So this could be a fun way to deal a lot of extra damage, especially with Spike Growth. There's an interesting interaction with Tavern Brawler and Spike Growth, and that your Spike Growth will deal extra damage based on your strength. And so basically just turn yourself into an owlbear, and after you use Spike Growth, that is, and enjoy the fun. So Tavern Brawler could be a really fun feat for your Spore Druid, apparently. That's if you're shapeshifting. You don't have to be doing that, because oftentimes we'll just be doing our symbiotic entity. So we're going to go Warcaster here. We're not going to do the Tavern Brawler cheese just yet. At least not for this. At least not for this guide. And at level 9, we get access to 5th level Druid spells. 5th level Druid spells include Conjure Elemental, just like before. Really good spell. Insect Plague. Mass Cure Wounds. Okay. Wall of Stone, similar to the Ice Wall, except the stone. Greater Restoration will allow you to cure Charm, Stun, and Petrification effects. Clerics also get this spell too, but I didn't really mention it. We also get access to Cloud Kill, my favorite war crime spell in the game. And then Contagion. It's a pretty interesting way to inflict a variety of curses. We'll go look at that in a second. At level 10, we get another cantrip. We'll go ahead and grab Guidance there. And then we get another extra attack for our Wild Shapes at level 10. Pretty sweet. But then at level 10, we also get another way to use our Spores. With Spreading Spores, while Symbiotic Entity is active, you can create a cloud of Spreading Spores. And what is that? It's basically like an AoE nuke. That's a bonus action. Pretty sweet. It'll deal 2 to 16 necrotic damage per turn to all creatures that inhale them, except you and your allies. So this is a really good AoE spell to have for free. That won't hurt your friends. You also can turn into a dino. Neat. And then at level 11, we get access to 6th level spells here. We got Heal, Hero's Feast, Sunbeam, Wall of Thorns, and Windwalk. Hero's Feast is really good to buff up all of your lovely minions. Sunbeam is a giant AoE nuke in a line, that is. Of course, it does Radiant. You might be familiar with this from the Hand of Lathander. And then Wall of Thorns, similar to the other walls, this will do a giant spike wall. A Spore Druid is a lot of fun, and I highly encourage you guys to play it. Because at the end of the day, it's still a Druid, so you can still shapeshift to all the other fun things here. Moving on to one of the other newest additions to patch 8, things are getting spicier with the Hexblade Warlock. Now, Warlocks aren't traditional Necromancers. However, Pact of the Tome gives you access to some pretty cool Necromancy spells, such as Animate Dead. But the Hexblade is friggin' awesome. We already covered their Spectres from before, but then we have other means to assist in the Necromancer arts. Obviously, we have our curses, and we have access to Armor of Agathis and Hunger of Hadar for frost spells, and Cone of Cold. But we have all the damage that we deal through our Hexblade will either be Psychic, Force, or Cold for the most part. They do have some necrotic spells available, but for the most part, the Hexblade Warlock is a zombie's best friend, so to speak, in terms of the fact that it won't cause any harm to our future soldiers. But I could be yapping about the Hexblade, and let alone all of its multi-class potential, for a very long time. Let's just get straight into the build then. Oh boy, what a treat do we have here. Thanks to patch 8, we are granted perhaps one of the strongest 1-level dips of any class in the entire 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. The Hexblade Warlock. Oh boy, where to start? Well, for one, we get access to our Hex Warrior here, which allows us to bind Hex weapons, just like Pact of the Blade at level 3. If you take that invocation, most likely we will, because we want that extra attack, but baby steps. First, we'll be able to bind any weapon to us, and we'll be able to use Charisma for our attacks and damage. But wait, there's more. We also get access to medium armor, shields, and martial weapons. Pretty damn nice for a 1 level dip. But beyond that, we also get Hexblade's Curse. It is a bonus action, you curse a target. Damage rolls against that target will also deal a little extra damage based on our proficiency bonus. And then the number we need to roll a critical strike is reduced by 1, which you can combine with all the other items in the game that lower that chance by as well. The cool thing about the Hexed weapon is that anytime you attack with it, you have a chance to apply Hexblade's Curse for free, even without using this bonus action here. And on top of that, whenever a target dies with this Hexblade Curse, you'll be able to get healed based on your Charisma bonus, I believe. Pretty nice. And the fact that we'll be able to apply this anytime we attack with our melee hit is pretty good. Pretty damn good. But wait, there's more. Thanks to patch 8, we also got the lovely cantrip, Booming Blade. Strike with your weapon, afflicting your foe with a resonance that hurts them for 1d8 thunder damage when they move. It's not too crazy in the early game. It is pretty nice to get some cheeky damage here and there, but at level 5, this will upgrade to give you upfront thunder damage, and again at level 10. Just a nice way to get extra source of extra thunder damage. And thunder damage doesn't hurt corpses, so this is going to be fantastic for our Necromancer playthroughs. And on top of that, we also couldn't go with Eldritch Blast. If you play Warlock, you play the spell because of our level 2 features, which we're going to showcase in just a moment. And I know you're probably thinking, why would a Hexblade be considered a Necromancer? Well, just stick around and we'll show you in just a moment. As for your ability scores, this is a stat spread I highly encourage you to play with, which is 8 Strength, 14 Dex, 16 Constitution, 8 Intelligence, 10 Wisdom, and 17 Charisma. Because, again, I like to maintain concentration on our spells, although we won't have the most spells to concentrate on. But there is a really powerful spell we get with our 3rd level spells with Hunger of Adar, in which case you might want to have your dexterity be a little bit higher. But considering that we do have medium armor, 14 is generally most of the time what we're going to be able to get the most out of it. If you want to forego Constitution completely, go ahead and max out your dexterity so that way when you do find certain armors in the game that will get you a little bit more dexterity, you can kind of squeeze out a little bit extra armor class. But I'm fine with 14 here. And as for your skill checks, Warlocks have a lot of things to choose from. Might also be the fact that we're a human here, but pick whatever you desire that you feel like you might want in your playthrough. I do like to have Arcana, even though it doesn't really come up too often. But considering that we are a Charisma-based character, this might end up being the face of your party. So pick up all of the Charisma-based skill checks, and you won't go wrong. So as for our spells, at level 1, it made us pick Hex and Shield, which are 2 spells that we're going to probably end up wanting to have anyways. At level 2, we're going to pick up Armor of Gathis, which is a really great spell from Warlocks. It'll give you temporary hit points and can be upcasted. And on top of that, anytime you take damage while you still have some of the hit points on the shield, in melee that is, they will take cold damage. And as you upcast this, you'll increase the temporary hit points you have as well as the cold damage you deal out. So our Hexblade will be dealing force damage, thunder damage, and cold damage, all 3 of which are very corpse friendly. Then you can also pick Wrathful Smite. I don't really use a spell, but it's still cool to have. But then at level 2 of our Warlock, this is where things can get interesting, more or less. There's a few different ways for you to flavor your character here. Just to make things simple for you, I highly encourage you picking Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast. This will modify your Eldritch Blast to deal extra damage based on your Charisma. And Repelling Blast will allow each Eldritch Blast to push a creature. Pretty damn nice, especially in the early game, because there's a lot of cliffs and a lot of things to push over. So go ahead and grab that. And at level 3, we get access to level 2 spells. We could pick up Cloud of Daggers or Shatter, just like our other classes. However, we have a limited amount of spell slots per day, although we do get some of them back on short rest, so you can consider these spells. However, I highly encourage you picking Shadow Blade. This will conjure a sword that will deal psychic damage, and a pretty considerable amount of damage in the early game. And then if you up every other level you upcast this, you'll be able to get an extra 1d8 psychic damage die on top of that. A really good spell. And will be able to keep up pace with all of your two-handed users for the most part. I highly encourage you to pick this spell. Now for our Pact Boon at level 3, there are technically 2 options you can choose for your Hexblade. If you want to be more Necromancy, you could pick up Pact to the Tome, because there's some cool stuff you can get later in the game when you enhance your Pact to get some free Necromancy spells. However, if you want to have extra attack and while being a pure Hexblade, you'll need to take Pact of the Blade, unfortunately. It's the only way to get extra attack as a Hexblade by itself. Otherwise, I highly encourage Pact of the Tome. Hopefully there's a mod or something that will load us to get our extra attack regardless, so that way we can pick up Pact of the Tome. Because really, the only thing that's hurting from it is the pure Warlocks who want to pick up Pact of the Tome instead of Pact of the Blade. Since Hexblade has a lot of overlapping features from it, because when Larian first introduced this class to the game, Warlock that is, Hexblade was not available, so they kind of baked in some of the Hexblade features into the Pact of the Blade itself. So it's kind of redundant, but in order for us to get extra attack, we need to pick Pact of the Blade here. Alright, at level 4, we get another cantrip. I'm going to pick up Friends here, considering that this guy most likely will be the face of your party, and this will give you advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile people. So this will help you get those rolls a little bit easier. And as for spells, we're going to pick up Cloud of Daggers here. Once we get access to Hunger Vidar next level, we can replace that. Instead of getting Cloud of Daggers, we'll pick up Darkness. And we'll explain why in just a moment. Alright, so here's where things can get a little interesting in terms of feats. Obviously, I always encourage you to increase your ability score improvement to get your most out of your class. So in this case, we'd increase Charisma. However, so if you did pick up Anti-Ethel's Hair, you'd have that 18 Charisma, and then you'd be at 20 now. There is a feat here with Actor, which will increase your Charisma by 1 to round it up to 18, but also give you proficiency on Deception and Performance checks. Not too shabby. You could also take Performer as well, although that would just give you music proficiency. So I guess if you want to have a band and also keep your Charisma by a half feat as well to get rounded to 18, you can go that route too. If you don't really care about getting your abilities scores up to max just yet, I highly encourage you picking Savage Attacker, especially if you're using Shadowblade. Because whenever you attack with a melee weapon, such as Shadowblade, you roll your damage die twice and use the highest result. So it's basically like rolling your damage die with advantage. And considering that will be your Shadowblade initially will have 2d8 damage, that's 2 different dice to get higher damage on average. Forecaster, Resilient, just like the others, would be quite nice to use as well. But again, to keep things simple, we'll just increase our Charisma here. Actually, no, we'll spice it up. We'll do Actor. Alright, at level 5, this is where things get really, really nice for our Hexblade. We get access to level 3 spells, so we have Hunger Vidar for a really reliable, big AoE spell. Fantastic spell in the game. If you've never used a Warlock before, you gotta try this spell. It completely nullifies a lot of encounters. It just makes things so good. Or it makes things so easy. You blanket an area in darkness, they're blinded, they're slowed. Anytime they begin their turn, they take cold damage, and then whenever they end their turn, they take poison damage. Or acid. So the acid part is not necessarily something that we're too thrilled about, but then we also can put another Eldritch Invocation. Here, we're going to take Devil Sight. This will allow us to see normally in darkness and through magical darkness. In which case, we'll replace our spell here, Cloud of Daggers, and we're going to get Darkness. So this will allow us to throw darkness on the field. It's kind of defensive for us, but we can also use that to our advantage to blind our enemies and just keep murdering them as we're in the shadows. And which is really good because our Shadowblade gets advantage whenever we're obscured. So, I mean, we're getting double advantage, but that doesn't really matter considering they're already blinded. But anyways, moving on to level 6. And this is even another level where the Hexblade gets insane. We get another 3rd level spell, whoop-de-doo. Pick whatever you desire. I'm probably going to just pick up Misty Step, although you shouldn't really rely on it, but sometimes you just need it. The main reason why it gets crazy here is at level 6, whenever we slay a creature, or an ally slays a creature that is afflicted by our Hexblade curse, whether we cast it ourselves or if our melee attack applied it to them, we can raise a specter to fight alongside us. And we'll have to use our reaction for it. So you have to keep in mind whenever you summon one of these, and there's 1 of 3 different types of specters that we will summon. We'll either summon a small one, a medium one, or a large one, and it depends on the size of the enemy that we slayed before when we first summoned it. And these things are freaking awesome. We can only summon one once per turn because it uses our reaction to use it. So you have to kind of weigh if you need to use your reactions to survive, such as things like shield or counterspell. If you picked up counterspell, that is. If you do use shield or counterspell or any other reaction, you won't be able to summon a cursed specter, and vice versa. If you summon a specter, you won't be able to use defensive things. So only use this if you feel like you can survive without those other reactions. The medium specters are going to be the one you're going to have the most time using, since that most of your enemies will be medium-sized. Every turn, they are stationary, and they will try to drain the health of your enemies, and they'll heal you for half that much. Sometimes they'll use their other ability to pull people, which is pretty neat to have. But a really cool thing is whenever you attack an enemy and you apply your Hexblade Curse, or they already had it on them, every single specter you have will use their own reaction to do a teleporting attack at your enemy. Specters are really freaking cool, and you can summon a ton of them, and they're really tanky, and oh man, they're just a lot of fun to play around with. But yeah, Hexblade, with these two specters right here, this is definitely earns them a place as a Necromancer in my book. I don't care what anybody says. Warlock at level 7. We get access to level 4 spells. Nothing super crazy here. I'd probably take Greater Invisibility or Phantasmal Killer. Just some utility spells or damage spells. And we get another Eldritch Invocation here. We can get a few different spell-like abilities here, but they do consume spell slots. I like taking Books of Ancient Secrets because we can cast all these spells that we have here at least once per day for free. Silence, Ray of Sickness, and Chromatic Orb. Nothing super crazy to write home about, but they're free spells, so why not? And there are purposes for each of them, to be fair. Alright, at level 8, we have access to more level 4 spells. Take whatever you want here. I'm going to take Dimension Door. And then we have another feat to pick up. I'm going to go with Charisma, just to round it out to 20. And then next time we'll take Savage Attacker. You can take it now if you so desire, but it's not super necessary. Alright, at level 9 we get access to 5th level spells. I highly encourage taking Cone of Cold, although it is kind of cool to have another Smite ability here. You can banish targets. Kind of neat. Don't mind the arrow there. It used to be only applied to the ranged Banishing Smite, however the melee version can be used now too. And then we get more Eldritch Invocations. We can get Minions of Chaos, so you conjure elementals now with our Warlock spell slot, which I'll probably utilize. You can also speak with the dead or cast Enhanced Sleep, but they'll all have those other means, so we're going to go with the Conjure Elemental. You know how much of a fan I am of this spell. Then for level 10, we get another cantrip. I'm just going to go ahead and pick up Minor Illusion, because why not? And then we'll take our Vanishing Smite. Alright, Warlock level 11. We get a Mystic Arcanum here to get a level 6 spell. We can get Create Undead to get a Mummy. Now, honestly, if you are playing a Hexblade Warlock, if you're not going with the Darkness route, there's a lot of really good spells to utilize fear effects, as well as some items too in the game, in which case a Mummy might be useful for you. You can also get Eye Bite, Arcane Gate. I never really utilized that, honestly. Or Circle of Death. I'm going to go with Create Undead just to kind of get more of that Necromancy vibe here. And then, you know what? We'll take Vampiric Touch for fun. Although we're not really going to use it because we can heal ourselves a ton from just our Hexblade Curse. Not to mention the ludicrous amounts of damage we're going to be doing in just a moment once I go over the items. Although to be fair, the Warlock is very self-sufficient, and honestly, even if we're naked, we'll still be a killing machine with just Shadow Blade. Alright, at level 12 we get another spell to pick from. Pick whatever you desire. You really can't go wrong here, as long as you pick just something. I'll go with Counterspell. You never know, maybe you need it. And then a cool reason you might want to consider doing 12 levels of Warlock is the level 12th invocation feature here called Life Drinker. This will allow us to deal extra necrotic damage equal to our charisma modifier, so we get even more use of our high charisma. This is nearly identical to the Oathbreaker aura to get extra charisma based on your attacks. So if you're considering doing 7 levels of Oathbreaker and 5 levels of Warlock, you can just go straight into 12 levels of Warlock and you'll be just fine. And then for our last feat, we're going to go with Savage Attacker, just to get ludicrous amounts of damage on our Shadow Blade, or at least to help ensure that we do ludicrous amounts of damage. The thing I need to make sure you guys know that when you're playing your Warlock is, and you're using your Shadow Blade, anytime you take a long rest, make sure you summon your Shadow Blade, and more importantly, you bind your damn Hex weapon. Otherwise, you won't get your extra attack, and you won't be able to do your charisma-based attacks at that. Really, all you need is Shadowblade and whatever items you so desire. You can use the same weapon items as Shadowheart does in my Shadowheart build. You can use wear medium armor, just a variety of things here, but really, my will in this game doesn't really have much on him, because he doesn't need it. All he needs is Shadowblade and the Resonant Stone, which you can acquire in Act 2, near the end of it, in a certain layer, I should say. Particularly when you go to the area where a bunch of undead are and you see a bunch of little heads there. There's a Resonant Stone here, which looks like this. Here, let me just throw it down on the ground. Looks like that. And what this will do is it will basically make an aura around you that makes anybody near you be vulnerable to psychic damage. Including ourselves, if I recall correctly. Yeah, we have vulnerability to psychic, so be careful with that. Now, just look how much damage we do if we land an attack on her. Obviously, she has higher AC, but look at that. 52 damage. 114 because we crit. Pretty nuts, huh? And that's a one-handed strike. And on top of that, anytime we kill something that is applied from our Hexblade curse, I'm pretty sure she has it. Oh no, I think it fell off when she died. We'll be able to summon those crazy specters. So Hexblade is definitely a very, very potent class. With or without the Resonant Stone, if I'm quite frank. You're going to have a really great time with this class. And personally, in my heart, I think the Hexblade is the true Death Knight in all of Baldur's Gate 3 and D&D 5th edition, in my opinion. Yeah, sure, the Oathbreaker is, I guess, technically a Death Knight since it can wear heavy armor, but who needs heavy armor to be a Death Knight? Like, this looks pretty heavy to me. Granted, it's medium, but still. You can still be a Death Knight, Will. I believe in you. One thing I want to note that if you do Will's questline to get this weapon, you can summon this Cambion here, which is a demon that fights with a melee weapon, which is very important for your Oathbreaker Paladin aura, with his aura of hate. A paladin and any nearby fiends and undead, the additional damage based on his charisma, dealt with melee weapons, and here is a fiend fighting with a melee weapon. And then we come to the Oathbreaker Paladin, the Dark Knight. Some people may view them as a Death Knight, however, I personally think that the Hexblade is the true Death Knight out of all of these classes. The Oathbreaker Paladin is pretty awesome, however, it isn't as good as it could be compared to tabletop. Essentially, the Oathbreaker Paladin is a paladin who broke their oath. They're not necessarily evil, they just broke their oath is all, and they have, I guess, evil powers. But, hey, as the Oathbreaker Paladin says, they can be used for good or ill, so it's not all evil. But we do have a lot of undead-related spells now, including one of our abilities to control undead. Granted, there aren't a lot of targets for us to control undead. Personally, my favorite is the Death Shepherds, but there's only really 2 spots you actually find them. One is in the passageway on the way to the Githyanki Crash, and then the second is in the Oubliette right before you fight the final bosses of Act 2. And they are a perfect addition to your undead army since they have an aura that gives resistance to all of your lovely undead. Although I don't necessarily know if they can actually resurrect our undead for us, since when our undead perish, they just vanish. So, but another thing you can do with control undead is controlling anything that is a shadow cursed undead. And there's plenty of ways to finagle some Act 2 shenanigans with that, such as kidnapping people and throwing them into the shadow curse and then resurrecting them afterwards, or just, kiting them out of whatever their area they are. But the simultaneously cool and disappointing thing about the Oathbreaker is their level 7th aura of hate, which will buff all of your undead with your charisma modifier. However, it only works if they're wielding a melee weapon, and literally every single undead that we can summon is not wielding a melee weapon. They're all either hitting with their fists or their claws. Meaning we have to rely on using control undead to get undead with melee weapons, or you can also summon some fiends that have weapons as well. That being said, the Oathbreaker Paladin is a pretty cool addition because at the end of the day, they're a paladin and they still kick a lot of ass. And then their other feature is Dreadful Aspect, but I could go and yap about Oathbreaker Paladins for quite a while. Let's just get into their build. And now we are moving on to our Oathbreaker Paladin. One thing you might notice is that the Oathbreaker is not one of the subclasses you can start off with for your Paladin. That's because you have to do some roleplay elements within the game to break your oath. The Oathbreaker will give you some features that complement the Necromancer playstyle. Before we move on to that, we got to figure out what kind of paladin we want to be, or break our oath. Now you could easily just break your oath at level 1 by just stealing anything for the most part, since most paladin oaths are virtuous in the way of, being a good guy, more or less. The Vengeance paladin can be more lenient towards an evil type paladin, because vengeance is all that matters to you, fighting the greater evil and all that kind of stuff, so they can be considered fairly blunt in that sense. Not to mention that Vengeance paladins are probably one of the more destructive of the paladins, and can do some pretty considerable damage until you decide to turn to the dark side, so to speak. Although, being an Oathbreaker doesn't necessarily make you evil, as you can use your Oathbreaker powers for good or ill, as the Oathbreaker Knight will tell you once he comes forth to you. So really, it really doesn't matter too much on which ones you pick first. I would highly suggest playing as an Oath of Ancients paladin or an Oath of Vengeance paladin. Oath of Ancients is kind of like a Druid in Heavy Plate. However, their level 1 feature, Healing Radiance, is phenomenal. It's a really good AoE healing aura that will heal you when you first cast it and at the beginning of your next turn. So if you know that you're going to be taking a lot of group damage, maybe stealing your paladin, he or she can keep them up pretty nicely. And then Vengeance can get a lot of stuff to help do a lot of damage to your enemies. So personally, I would actually play as the Vengeance paladin just to murder some early game flows. At level 3, they get ways to get advantage and such like that. So we're going to level up this paladin to level 7 or so, and then we're going to become an Oathbreaker, and then we'll go over some different builds you might consider for your paladin. So as for your stats, there are a few different ways you can make your paladin. Especially if you consider multi-classing with a 1-level dip into Hexblade Warlock to get charisma-based attacks. Now, it also depends if you want to chug strength potions, in which case you can just forego your strength altogether, but some people don't like having to rely on giant strength potions. I personally don't mind it, because you can get so many of them. But if you don't want to rely on any of that stuff and just be a pure normal paladin, a spread of 16 strength and constitution will do you quite nicely, as well as the 12 dex and a 14 charisma. We do want our charisma to be fairly high, even if we're not focusing on it for our attacks with Hexblade, for example, but you probably should consider that. But you can't go wrong with this spread. And obviously, if you were chugging strength pots, you can invest that strength into your charisma or dexterity. Although dexterity would only help your initiative, not necessarily your armor class, because we can wear heavy armor, and most of the time you can only get a maximum of 12 dex towards your AC. So this spread of 16, 12, 16, and then 14 charisma is not too bad. And as for your skills, pick whatever you so desire. Obviously, we're playing Minthara here. But if this is the only charisma-based character in your party, you might consider them being a face, so you might want to have all of the charisma-based skill checks. Fortunately, the Paladin is a multi-ability dependent, or MAD, as you might see in other forums or things like that, such as Reddit. Paladin wants a lot of stats, so helping by multi-classing with Hexblade or chugging strength potions, you can help alleviate the need for all these different stats that you want to have. But we'll go with this for now, and we'll do quite well. At level 2 Paladin, we get access to fighting styles. All of these have their strong points, depending on how you want to build your character. Honestly, you can never go wrong with defense. It just gives you a flat +1 to AC, which is always quite nice. Dueling, if you want to be a little more offensive. If you know you're going to be using a versatile weapon, such as a longsword here. On the back of us right here is Falara Luve, one of the better longswords in the game. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does provide lovely bonuses to your allies or harms your enemy. And this will let you do a little bit extra damage if you're wielding it with a shield, which you most likely might be doing as a paladin. Or you might be using a great weapon fighting and using a big beefy two-hander, such as a bigger sword, in which case great weapon fighting will do you quite nicely. It's not the craziest fighting style, but it will help you increase your minimum damage a little bit. And then you also have access to protection. When you have a shield, you can impose disadvantage on an attack against your allies when you are within 1.5 meters, pretty close to them. And you'll also be able to see the attacker. However, one thing to note that this is a reaction, so you can impose disadvantage on your squishier Necromancer, for example, and maybe you might want to deal with a tank type character here until you break your oath. And even after you break your oath, you can still retain this protection. Pretty fun way to build your character, but you can't really go wrong with any of these. I would personally go with defense or dueling, or even protection, if you know you're going to try to protect your ally. But keep in mind, if it uses reaction to protect your ally, it's not always guaranteed to prevent them, but imposing disadvantage might help you prevent their enemy from having successful attack roll. I would just pick defense. Just make it easy for you. +1 AC. And then you don't feel like you're restricted to a certain fighting style in terms of fighting with a one-handed shield or a two-hander. You can fight with whatever you want. And then same thing for spells as clerics and druids. So paladins will always have access to all of their spells here. None of them are too crazy. They do get some unique spells here, like a compelled duel, which is kind of like a taunt, so to speak. They also get access to command and bless and cure. And heroism. Honestly, I would probably just run all of these spells right here. You might want to pick up Cure Wounds just to be a backup healer if you really need to. In which case, we'll run these. Heroism actually can be a pretty solid spell, considering that there are a few fights in the game where you do become frightened, but the fact that you also generate 5 temporary hit points every turn is pretty nice. But we're not going to go too crazy on our spells. Let's be real here. All those spell slots, who cares about the spell? Those are smite slots, damn it. We're going to be smacking things to high heavens. Because whenever we attack our opponent, we can expand a spell slot to do a divine strike to do incredible amounts of burst damage. When you are playing a paladin, please make sure to select your reactions down here. These little tiny icons above your UI right here. I believe you can also get those by pressing K. Oh no, it just helps your spellbook. So if you go to your spellbook and go to your reactions, make sure you have all these selected and enabled. And more importantly, make sure you have them hit ask. Because otherwise, if you go ahead and try to... Oh, I guess they fixed that. Before, if you use this attack, it would expand your spell slot, even if you miss. But now that's not the case, so it's not as important. But you can do other abilities in combination with your smite. So that's something to consider. Level 3, we get access to more level 1 spells because we're not a proper caster here. So we get spell slots at a much reduced rate. Oh boy, so here we are at level 4, we get our access to our feats, and honestly there's even more ways to build your paladin because there's so many different things that they could utilize. Obviously you can go with, you increase your strength, your charisma, whatever it might be, but because we are a paladin and we most likely will be using big beefy two-handers, Great Weapon Master is a phenomenal feat to have. It'll make all of your attacks do at least 10 extra damage at the cost of a -5 to your attack roll. And there are some ways to negate this in the early game. Especially considering a -5 is really debilitating. While this is incredibly strong in the early game, it also could be detrimental to you because you might not be able to hit things. But we can stave that off with things like Bless or Advantage and things of that sort, which we'll have plenty of access to that from being a Vengeance Paladin. Or having a Cleric in our party, as well as some other items, which we'll go over in a moment. And another fun thing to consider for your Paladin is the Polearm Master and Sentinel feats. Polearm Master and Great Weapon Master are the trio of feats that work so well together on tabletop that don't quite work as well on Baldur's Gate 3, but that's not necessarily the fault of the feat. It's just kind of the way the engine works, mostly because Polearm Master is kind of bugged, and also with how few feats we're actually able to acquire in the game. But Polearm Master is a neat way to be able to get attacks of opportunity and dole out extra damage with the bonus attack, which you can combine with Great Weapon Master to get a +10 extra damage even on that blunt bonus action attack. So it's a fun way to play your Paladin if you so desire. There aren't too many spells that you need to worry about concentrating here, so I wouldn't really worry about Warcaster or Resilient Constitution here. Really, I would go for something more martial, such as Great Weapon Master, Polearm Master, Sentinel, or increasing your ability scores. Alright, we're going to stop yapping here. Let's just go ahead and pick up we'll just pick up Great Weapon Master fighting. At level 5, we get access to extra attack, as well as our second level spells. We don't have anything super crazy here. We have a special smite and magic weapon, nothing to write home about. These are still smite slots after all. Although, because we are a Vengeance Paladin, we do get access to Misty Step. Now that is a good spell to have to help pursue your enemy. Before we continue, I just want to showcase, because I glanced over it, I missed it. At level 3, we get 2 ways to use our channel Oath Divinity. We can either use Vow of an Enemy and Abjure Enemy. Abjure Enemy will frighten an enemy, which makes it so that they have disadvantage on ability check and attack rolls and they can't move. Pretty cool. Also, Fiends and Undead have disadvantage to resist this. But more importantly, we have Vow of Enmity. You'll gain advantage on attack rolls against an enemy. However, in Baldur's Gate 3, we can cast this on ourselves. So now we just straight up have advantage for 10 turns. Pretty damn good. Alright, moving on to level 6. We get our first Paladin Aura, our protection, where we give a bonus to our saving throws as well as to our friends with anybody within a few meters of us. And this is based on our charisma bonus, so having that high charisma will make this aura all that much stronger. And then at Paladin level 7, with a Vengeance Paladin anyways, we'll get Relentless Avenger. If you hit an enemy with an opportunity attack, your movement speed increases by 4.5 until your next turn. So this works a lot better on tabletop, because when you use this ability, instead of having extra movement on your turn, you just get to straight up having a free movement turn there. So you can kind of set yourself up for more opportunity attacks. It's a lot better on tabletop, but I digress. Alright, we are level 7 now. Although unfortunately I just realized on this playthrough we cannot become an Oathbreaker. I might have killed the Oathbreaker Knight. So let's switch over to a save file that actually has that. I'm going to break our oath depending on what subclass of Paladin we took. There's a variety of ways you can do it. I'm pretty sure with the one we have here, if we just steal this wooden bucket here, we'll break our oath. Let's see.
You've been caught mid-robbery. A spasm grips your chest. Your strength falters. An emptiness grows within you, Paladin. Something has been lost.
You have broken your oath, Paladin. Do not resist. Surrender and be remade. Though born of a vile source, these powers can be used for good or ill. Your oath no longer binds you. The choice is yours alone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So what do we get from being an Oathbreaker? Well, our level 1 feature is replaced with Spiteful Suffering. The target will take 1 to 4 necrotic damage each turn, and attack rolls against it have advantage. Not too shabby. We then have 2 different ways to use our Channel Oaths from level 3. We have Dread Aspect. Let your darkest emotions burst force as menacing pulse to frighten nearby enemies. So it's basically an AoE fear. Pretty sweet. Can help you out in a pinch sometimes. And then we have a very niche ability called Control Undead. You can essentially control any undead in the game, as long as you're higher level than it and they fail their saving throw. Take note of this ability because we'll talk about this in just a moment. We also get a few different spells available to us. We get Inflict Wounds, Hellish Rebuke, Darkness, Crown of Madness, Animate Dead, and Bestow Curse. And then our level 7 feature is replaced with Aura of Hate. You and any nearby fiends and undead gain additional damage to your melee weapon attacks, equal to your charisma modifier. Now, this could have been an incredible feature for us to have in Baldur's Gate 3. However, every single undead minion that we can summon in the game does not have a melee weapon. Skeletons are unarmed and have bows. That's not a melee weapon. Zombies use their fists. Ghouls use their claws. No melee weapons. However, Control Undead lets us control some of the undead in the game that actually have weapons. Most notably, the Death Shepherd that you can find on the way to the Githyanki Crest in Act 1.5, as well as near the end of Act 2. Those are really good targets to have because they give your undead an aura to have resistance against physical damage for the most part. Pretty neat. It's kind of, like I said, it's a niche ability, although you can control some of the other Shadow Cursed enemies in Act 2. And actually you can make some really fun shenanigans there. So any enemy that you take into the Shadow Curse, maybe you extend them maybe you fight them and kind of pull them out to the Shadow Curse, they'll die and become undead, and you can control them with Control Undead. So there's a lot of really fun shenanigans you can do in Act 2 with this. And then there's also that item that Will can get if he completes his quest in Act 2 that will let him summon a fiend with a polearm. So there are some ways for you to actually utilize this for your allied undead, but at the very least with our Oathbreaker, we'll get charisma based. We'll get a little bit extra damage based on our charisma bonus, which is another reason why we would want to invest in high charisma. And the reason I was considering stopping at level 7 for Paladin is that we can multi-class with something else to get more spell slots, so to get more smites. Although level 8, obviously we get another feat, and we are pretty feat starved as a Paladin, so you might want to go that route. I would highly encourage picking at least a 1 level dip into Hexblade so that we can get charisma-based attacks, although it's not super crazy important. It would empower a lot of our charisma-based features, like our auras, but we can always chug strength potions to get massive strength and be able to smack things just fine. But for those who don't want strength potions, perhaps consider multi-classing with 1 level of Hexblade. Yeah, considering that we can do the Hexblade, instead of getting Pact of the Blade at level 3 for our Warlock, we could pick Pact of the Tome. And then we could be 7 levels of Paladin and 5 levels of Warlock, and getting that Pact of the Tome there so we can get some fun little Necromancy spells for free. Kind of making another Death Knight. Of course, you would miss out on our Spectres, but there's so many different ways to go about mixing Hexblade and charisma-based characters that you really can't go wrong. And you can totally play as a pure level 12 Paladin here. It's pretty straightforward for the most part. Increase your strength, increase your charisma, maybe dip into Hexblade if you so desire. You'll be fine. And then last but not least, the surprise Necromancer. Maybe you foresaw this coming, maybe you didn't. The Lore Bard. Yeah, really. With your magical secrets, you too can become a Necromancer by acquiring Animate Dead. However, on tabletop, and I apologize for referencing tabletop a ton, there are some pretty sweet spells that the Bard can get access to also make them feel like a Necromancer. One of those being Dance Macabre, which you can get from the Necromancy of Theatum. So that is technically in there, but it's available to everybody. That, and there's a few other spells like Wither and Bloom and whatnot. And honestly, I just really like the idea of a Bard being a puppeteer, making these zombies dance or something to that effect. That being said, there isn't too much to say about them other than Lore Bards are pretty sweet because they can help be the masters of being counterspelled to help protect everybody, and then we also have a lockpicker for the group, among other skills that they could acquire for you. Because in reality, all these other classes that can be Necromancers aren't really strong in the skill department, and that's where the Lore Bard can come hang out with us. They may not be a true Necromancer as all these other classes, but at least they have Animate Dead, and that's good enough, right? Right? Well, let's just get into their build real quick. If we were going to be a Bard Necromancer, perhaps we would do a stat spread of 16 Dex, 14 Con, 12 Wisdom, and 16 Charisma. Of course, you can always lower your Wisdom to get a higher Charisma if you want to use the Hag's Hair or perhaps the Actor Half Feet. Pick whatever starting instrument you want. I don't know why, but I kind of like the idea of a harp. Or a lyre for our undead minions to dance to. As for our cantrips, we're going to go with Vicious Mockery and Friends. For spells, unfortunately bards, it does matter what spells you pick, so we're going to go with Thunder Wave, but we're definitely going to get Healing Word, Fairy Fire, and you know what, if in case we don't have a Spore Druid nearby, let's do Speak with Animals. As for your skills, we can pick any skills in the game, so if this bard is your 4th party member, or if it's your face, you'll want to pick things accordingly. Moving on to level 2, just pick whatever spell you so desire here. I'm going to go with Featherfall, just to keep picking up spells that are useful out of combat. At level 3, this is where we get to pick our subclass. So what does Lore Bard provide us? Well, first off, we'll be able to get 2 skills to get Expertise in. We're not going to pick up Deception and Performance, we'll do Sleight of Hand and Persuasion. We then get access to level 2 spells here. We're going to go with just Cloud of Daggers. It's a really powerful spell in the early game, and we'll do this quite nicely throughout the game. Forgot we get to get more proficiencies, so let's go ahead and pick up other skills. Let's go with Stealth, let's do Arcana, and we'll do Survival. We got Cutting Words here. You can use your wit to distract the creature and sap its confidence. Cantrips, we got another cantrip. We'll go with Mage Hand or with Minor Illusion here to do some thieving shenanigans. For spells, we're going to go with Shatter to get AoE thunder damage. can go with hold person as well. For feats, I'm going to go with the actor feat to get a half feat, which will increase our charisma by 1 and also give us our expertise in deception and performance. That's why we didn't pick it earlier. Bard level 5, we get access to level 3 spells. Now, bards don't have the craziest of spell lists, but we're going to go with Glyph of Warding here. Alright, at bard level 6, this is when we can finally actually be somewhat of a necromancer. We'll be able to get counter charm here. You and allies have advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. Pretty useful for your party. Get another 3rd level spell here. Let's do Stinking Cloud. Actually, no, let's do Hold Person. And then, because we are a lore bard, we can pick spells from any spell list. Just about. And, well, we do want to be necromancers here, so let's go ahead and pick up Animate Dead and Counterspell. Pretty nice spell to have on a lore bard. Alright, level 7, we get access to level 4 spells. Nothing super crazy here. Let's do Confusion. Otherwise, Greater Invisibility would work nicely. I guess Freedom of Movement would work too, but it's only on one target. Okay, Bard level 8, we'll do Greater Invisibility. Actually, no, let's do Fear. Let's do a Fear-based character on this Bard. Alright, so for our feat, we're just going to go ahead and round up our Charisma. Otherwise, typical spellcasting type stuff would be well here. As well as Dexterity, I suppose. Now, let's go ahead and pick our 5th level spells. Again, nothing super crazy here. I guess we'll go with Dominate Person. Okay, at 10th level Bard, we get access to even more magical secrets. As well as another cantrip, we'll do Minor Illusion. We also get 2 more skills to be proficient in. Actually, no, I think this is Expertise, yes. So we'll do Perception and Intimidation. We'll be a scary man. For spells, we get more 5th level spells. Let's do Mass Cure Wounds, and we'll do Greater Invisibility. So now we also get access to even more magical secrets here. We can go Spirit Guardians. Kind of be a pseudo Death Cleric. Kind of a shame we can't get access to Cloud Kill. That'd be fantastic here. We can do Conjure Elemental. Hunger of Adar. I'm not too mad at any of these spells. So, and then for our Bard, we can either stay as a level 11 Bard here. We get access to our 6th level spells. What's really these two? Eye Bite or Auto's Irresistible Dance. That's always a really fun ability to use. Although we could also consider multi-classing into Warlock. It doesn't have to be Hexblade here. It could be any Warlock really. Let's do Great Old One will allow us to get Fear on the critical hits actually. So let's do Great Old One, and we'll pick up Hex with Dissonant Whispers. The reason we decided to do a 2-level dip into Warlock is so we can get Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast for Eldritch Blast. And then pick whatever other spell you want. Let's go with Armor of Agathis so we can get some defensives going. Now, if you did want to play as this character, and if you did want to play a Bard as you're leveling up, instead of going all the way up to Bard 10 and then switching into Warlock, I would really highly recommend getting the early levels of Warlock much earlier in the game. Perhaps even as early as level 2, level 3, just so you can get your Agonizing Eldritch Blasts online as soon as possible. Or you could probably just wait till character level 7 to multi-class. That way you can start getting Eldritch Blasts and kind of having some things to do in between your fighting. Now, I know it's not very impressive in terms of being a Necromancer, but we can still upcast and get our zombies and such. But I always just like the idea of playing a Bard type character and having your undead minions be, I don't know, suppose puppets, and you can make them dance, that kind of spiel. I know most people are going to be commenting, "Oh, Bard, you just picked Animate Dead, that makes you a Necromancer, blah 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 blah." Yeah, who cares, we're just doing this for fun at this point. But Bards are really powerful, nonetheless. And having a lore Bard there to help protect your undead minions with counterspell and such is a good way to go. Is it as good as a Spore Druid, Death Cleric, or Necromancer Wizard? Probably not. Is it fun? Yeah. And it's just further proving that the Bard is the perfect 4th character, and fill whatever needs you might desire. Look at that, we got access to Spirit Guardians here with 5th level spell slots. Hunger Havadar, also with 5th level spell slots. Of course, it doesn't actually matter though. Oh, 3rd level is as high as it can go. Upcasting doesn't do anything. We can upcast our 5th level Armor of Agathis here to get 25 temporary hit points and 25 damage. Our Eldritch Blasts are actually useful, so that way we have a meaningful attack when we're not using spell slots. It's a decent character overall. Of course, there's plenty of really good Bard items throughout the game, although for the purposes of this Necromancy guide, we're not going to go too much in depth in the Bard. I just wanted to still showcase this just to give you an idea that maybe you might consider playing a Bard in a future tabletop game. And in the off chance that Larry decides to add more content to Baldur's Gate 3, we can always hope, right? And maybe this might give him an idea that maybe they might make a Necromancer type style Bard. And well, that's all the leveling guides. Let's move on to the next portion of the guide. Alright, so now that we're in the items section, I do want to give you a caveat here. This is post-editing Remortis, by the way. At this point, I am beyond editing fatigue, so when I originally recorded this, I kind of did it out of order in terms of the classes and the items and such, so it's just mostly just me yapping about every single class in the party, because I did a full Necromancer party. And well, here are all the items. If you guys think I've missed any items, please let me know down in the comments so other people can learn from it, as I want to compile as much Necromancy information here. So again, any items I missed, by all means, post it in the comments, let me know. But these are some of the items I think that would really help you get your early game going on, and I didn't want to go too into detail, otherwise this video would probably have been 4 or 5 hours, and yeah, this has been pretty nuts as it is. So, alright, let's move on to the items. I believe I started with the Oathbreaker here, so here we go. So for our Oathbreaker, at the end of Act 1, obviously we've done the Grimforge here, here is some sample gear that will get you along quite well. Obviously, at the very end, when you kill the Grim, you'll be able to get his helmet here, which will give you the ability to cast Hunter's Mark, as well as getting a fire resistance. Pretty solid. The most important part here is that you cannot be critically striked. Very nice. Obviously, in this playthrough, we're playing as the Dark Urge, so we have our little invisible cloak. But as for armor, really you don't find too much heavy armor in Act 1 until you get to the Grimforge, and you can craft yourself the Adamantine Splint Mail. Otherwise, I mean, I guess you could pick up some chainmail or something to that effect. But honestly, I just wear the Scale Mail of Vengeance till I get the Adamantine Mail. Just because, look how cool that is. The drip is supreme. So some alternate helmets you can pick up as you're venturing in Act 1. Because honestly, I like just the regular metal helmet. It suits the rest of the outfit quite well. There is the Gloves of Heroism, which you can find beneath the Toll House in Act 1 next to Risen Road. This is going to be underneath the building that you find the Paladins with here, and you can find a key to the door down there, over here I believe. If you speak with dead, you can talk to the corpse and he kind of points you in the direction to go. There is a little puzzle that you got to figure out, but once you do, you'll be able to get these lovely gloves. And what these do is they'll give you heroism whenever you use your Channel Oath spell. And there's plenty of really good Channel Oath spells for whatever kind of paladin you decide to be. Whether you're going to be an Oathbreaker or decide to stay as Paladin of Vengeance, you'll be able to get Heroism, which will make you immune to fear, and also give you a little bit of temporary hit points extra every turn. Pretty sweet gloves to have. Not the best, but it is Paladin specific, and you might want to use your other gloves for other characters. As for your jewelry, 2 of these you can acquire very close to each other. The Brood Mother's Revenge, which will, whenever you are healed, your weapon will become coated in poison to do extra poison damage. Pretty sweet. As well as the Ring of Protection, which is simply +1 armor class and saving throws. Those are both fantastic jewelry that you can get. And in order to get this, first let's talk about the Ring of Protection. So in order to get these, let's talk about the Ring of Protection first. So the main thing you need to make sure you do in order to acquire it is when you're in the grove, make sure you go up here, over to the canyon right here where the little harpies are, and save the little boy. Make sure he survives. If you do, he'll go to Mole, and then go find the kids down in their hidden cave. Talk to Mole and ask if she needs any help with anything, and she'll ask you to steal the idol. Now obviously, if you take the idol right away, they're going to freak out and just start killing all the tieflings, and we don't really want that. Maybe you do, but I would just hold off on it. Because in order to acquire the Broodmother's Revenge, other than just outright killing Kaga, we can expose her. By going into the back of her room, there is a locked chest with a journal. Read that journal, and you will be taken. Read that journal, and it'll talk about meeting up behind a tree in the swamp, which is down over here. As you can see, this is Auntie Ethel's house, Riverside Toll House. There is a little dock over here that you can jump across here and then jump there. You will have to fight a bunch of mud methods and some tree people, some woads, or basically like a tree perk people. It can be a little bit of a challenging fight, so just take caution. One note I will give for advice for you is that whenever you kill the little mud methods, they will explode, so don't be standing next to them. Anyways, once you are done slaying them, there is a little patch behind the tree here that you can go to, and you'll go inside there, and there's another note that talks about the Shadow Druids. Once you have that and read the other journal, make your way back to the Groove and go confront Kaga and talk to her. And then you gotta hand wrap the letter, and then a fight will ensue. You can either decide to try to persuade Kaga to do what's right, or you can just kill her off. If you do decide to have her do what's right, which is probably the easier way to go, she'll fight alongside you against your new enemies, but maybe she might have an accident, quote unquote. If you know what I mean. Accidentally damage her, maybe potentially end her. That way you can acquire this lovely necklace. Either way, it is a great combination, especially with another ring you can acquire from the Druid Grove from Volo, called the Whispering Promise. This will basically just give you the bless condition whenever you heal a creature, and they will receive that bless too. And this will also apply to things such as Hexblade's Curse or your potions, which is really good as it can help you to hit your targets, especially if you decide to go with Great Weapon Fighting. And what better weapon to use with the early game Great Weapon Fighting than Svartalfheim's Bee's Woundseeker. Probably the best two-hander in Act 1. This is a very uncommon sword. As the way to acquire it, well, let's go ahead and take a stroll through Joaquin's Rest over here. If you can take a guess, we had to murder everybody here. Specifically, we had to kill Yeva. So in order to fight the Flaming Fist, there's a few ways you can go about it. Obviously, you can just fight them head on, but I would highly suggest you wait till you're level 5 or have some kind of sources of AoE and such like that, because they are a lot of enemies and they will overwhelm you. There are some really powerful characters here, such as Gauntlet Yeva and Gauntlet Dane. Gauntlet Dane will single-handedly destroy your life, as she is a Light Cleric and has access to the Channel Oath Light Cleric ability, Radiant Dawn or something like that, and it's just a giant Radiant nuke, and she'll just blow up your entire party. So, another way you can also handle them, as you can see there's a few Git corpses among the bodies here, well, you can actually pull the Githyanki from the bridge over here, and as you can see there's a trail of blood from every time they hit me. You can try to run over this way every turn and hopefully you don't die, and you can have them engage the Flaming Fist. They are both enemies and they will fight each other, and honestly the Githyanki will do some massive destruction to the Flaming Fist. Honestly, sometimes I see the Githyanki win this fight, but most of the time the Flaming Fist will, because there's just so many of them. The Githyanki have come close, but obviously you can intervene. You might even consider using your Ogre Horn here to help turn the tide, whether you're fighting with the Githyanki or without. Anyways, that's how you get Svartalfheim's Woundseeker. Alright, so here is our Hexblade at the end of Act 1. Pretty solid stuff all around and fairly easy to acquire all this gear. Obviously, the Adamantine Scale Mail is something you get at the very end of Act 1 in the Grimforge. However, you can utilize any medium armor. I believe on Will I used Breastplate +1, or honestly you can just use Lae'zel's armor, and it'll do you quite nicely. That's if you don't want to have Lae'zel in your party. If you want to keep Lae'zel around, obviously she might want to have her armor. But she's supposed to be wearing heavy armor, to be fair. That being said, this is some pretty good half plate here, 15 armor class. It's kind of hard to beat. And you can find an early piece of Breastplate +1 as soon as you get to the Grove. However, you will need to do some stealth chicory in order to acquire it, as it is next to the blacksmith right here, Damon. Now, there's a few ways you can go about it. You can do minor illusion shenanigans, or perhaps you can have a bard distract everybody, and then you can go in and just swipe it. And then whoever stole it just made him teleport immediately to camp, and you should be good to go. But if you don't want to do all that, just take Lae'zel's armor, and that should last you most of the act until you get to the end and acquire your Adamantine Scale Mail, and will bump us to 21 AC. For our helmet, we have the Shade Spell Circlet, which you can acquire from Omeluum once you do his quest to get the mushrooms from the Arcane Tower in the Underdark. And this reads, when the wearer is obscured in shadow, their spells will have an extra spell DC, which is pretty nice. Especially depending on how you're building your Hexblade, I highly encourage you to utilize a Darkness build, meaning that you're going to be able to cast Darkness or have somebody else cast Darkness around you, or Darkness arrows, and then hide in that Darkness and utilize your Shadow Blade and whatever Darkness shenanigans you want. And this will do you quite nicely. And speaking of the Shadows of Darkness, another good alternative for medium armor would be the Justicar Mail. It does have considerably less AC than the Adamantine Scale Mail and Lazel's or the Breastplate +1, as it has a lower AC of 13. But it does have the upside of whenever you're obscured in shadow, you'll do extra necrotic damage. So I guess a little bit of AC drop can yield you a little bit extra damage. It's up to you whether you feel like that's worth it or not. If you're in a party, it's probably fine, but if you're solo, probably not. And as for your gauntlets, we have the Gloves of Power here. Whenever you hit with the weapon, you inflict Bane for the most part. And you also get +1 to sleight of hand, which isn't super crazy. But this is still decent gloves to have. I mean, there are plenty of other gloves you can utilize as well, such as the Gloves of the Growling Underdog, which I believe are from the Goblin Camp and the treasure cache behind Ragsland. But there's also the Winter's Clutches, which is given to you by Gloot after completing Avenging Gloot's Circle, which is by destroying the Dwergar. Now, you don't do tons of cold damage, but maybe you might want to, whether it's with the Cold Staff, or perhaps you're using Hunger of Vidar or Armor of Agathis. It's not super crazy, but if you do, you can combine it with a few other cold things, and it's pretty good to go. Otherwise, the Gloves of Power will suit you quite nicely, or the Gloves of the Underdog. Or you can use the Wondrous Gloves, which will simply boost your armor class by 1 near the Dwarven camp down there. Let's go ahead and pull that up here so you guys can see what I'm talking about. You can find the Mimics down over here. There's a little pathway up this way, and there's like a little stone stairs you can climb down, and there's 3 Mimics here, as well as the Hidden Harper Cache, which is a tiny little toy chest, and then you have to have a passive perception check, and you should be able to find it. Pretty sweet gloves, even if you're not a bard, for that extra AC. Then, as you can see, we equip the Broodmother's Revenge, the Ring of Protection, and the Whispering Promise. All of these are fantastic on a Hexblade, especially considering that the heal you get from your Hexblade Curse will trigger both Whispering Promise and Broodmother's Revenge. Pretty damn nice if you ask me. And as for our weapon, we are utilizing Shadow Blade, which we can acquire with 2nd level spells, and once we use this with a 3rd or 4th level slot, it will increase it by an additional 1d8. And then once again, at 5th and 6th level, it will increase to 16 on top of that. Damn good weapon. It does basically as much damage as a two-hander does. However, you won't have access to the Great Weapon Master feat. So you can probably consider using the Savage Attacker, as it will help you potentially get more damage, since it will they'll roll the damage with advantage, quote unquote, for each of the weapon die. And as you can see, we're rolling plenty of die here. And as for our shield, honestly, any shield will do, because all shields basically give you +2. So find whatever shield you like and slap it on here. You'll be good to go. Then for our ranged weapon, we're hardly ever going to use that, since we're mostly just going to be using Eldritch Blast if we can't hit them with our melee. I picked up Herald, just for fun. But moving on to our Death Cleric. The Shadowheart looking like Shadowheart, and this is in Act 1. So a lot of this stuff we're going to acquire in the Underdark, but there's some stuff that we can acquire before that. Such as Hellrider's Pride, which is a fantastic pair of gloves, which you can find as soon as you get to the Druid Grove. Depending on your options, when you see Aridin confront Zevlor, if you let him knock out Zevlor, Zevlor will be passed out on the ground, and you can have somebody pickpocket these out of his pockets. And you'll be able to, he won't resist you, because obviously he's knocked the heck out. And these gauntlets are amazing. Well, not super amazing, but they're really nice. Whenever you heal another creature, so meaning not you, you'll be able to basically give it Blade Ward. Blade Ward on itself is an okay cantrip, but getting it for free whenever you heal somebody? Yes, please. And what that means is that you're gonna have resistance against slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning damage. So if you cast this on somebody who's your tank or whatever, whoever's up front, they'll be able to receive less damage. But obviously, you could do the same thing with the other characters. You could use the Ring Protection. You could use the Ring of Whispering Promise to give creatures Bless whenever you heal them, and Blade Ward, which is going to be quite nice. You can use Ring of Salving. You restore an additional 2 hit points every time you heal another creature. So that way you get a little bit of healing when you heal somebody else, meaning that you both get the benefits of your Whispering Promise. Anyhow, as for our armor, you can find this near Grim Forge. On your way towards the Adamantine Forge, just follow that big long hallway and look at the Sharan corpses on the ground. I'll pull up the map right here for you. Here is the waypoint. You just make your way over this way and then follow this path all the way down here. And you will find some Sharan corpses on the ground around this area, something like that. Loot them, and one of them will have this lovely armor. And as mentioned in the Hexblade portion of my items, that this has low AC, but you get a benefit of whenever you're obscured by shadow, you can deal an extra 1 to 4 necrotic damage. Nothing super crazy, and you don't have to use it. I just like it because it's a Sharan thing and it looks good on Shadowheart. That's pretty much the main reason. However, you could obviously utilize any medium armor. Again, the breastplate +1, light armor +2, Lae'zel's armor, or you can even use the luminous armor since we are still a cleric at the end of the day, meaning we'll still have access to radiant spells. So you could obviously wear any of the radiant gear, such as the luminous armor, which you can find in the Selenite Temple below the Goblin Camp. With the radiant gear, you won't really be able to acquire more of it until you get to Act 2. So this is going to be what you'll be able to find in Act 1, and it's still quite nice. Whenever you deal damage with a radiant ability, such as Spirit Guardians or your lovely spell that always misses all the damn time, we can cause a Radiant Shockwave. When a wearer deals radiant damage, they cause a Radiant Shockwave. And what is that? Let's look again. Inflict a radiating orb, and which will reduce the enemy's chance to hit things. So this could be useful even if you're not using necrotic things and just hit things with light armor. Pretty handy overall. And as for the boots, I have her using the Boots of Striding. When you cast a spell that requires concentration, you gain momentum for 1 turn. And momentum just basically means you move a little bit further. Pretty sweet. And then, more importantly, when you are concentrating, you cannot be knocked prone. And you cannot be moved against your will. So shove effects and all that things are not good against you. It's going to be good for any caster that's concentrating, but I think this is especially good for clerics since they have some of the best concentration spells that you want to keep around, such as buffs and control spells. You simply get these by defeating Minthara, whether you knock her out or kill her. And she will be wearing these lovely boots. And as for your weapon, now, the Dead Cleric has plenty of options when it comes to weapons. We're not going to really be attacking too much in melee, but if we did, we can, since we have access to plenty of martial weapons. So there's a lot of cool weapons that maybe the fighter or the paladin or the barbarian don't really want to use, that the cleric is more than happy to utilize. One of these weapons is Falar Luve, which I've talked to death in most of my videos, and this is going to be fantastic for your Necromancer playthroughs, whether the Death Cleric is by itself or with a bunch of other Necromancers and having tons of minions. Mainly for its features to use our Melody here to either cast Seeing or Shriek. Seeing is essentially an aura that's basically Bless, and Shriek on the other hand will give a penalty to enemy saving throws and also make them suffer extra thunder damage, which is really nice for us since thunder doesn't destroy orc corpses. So thunder is a good thing. Moving on to our lovely Necromancer here. As you can see, he's level 1 dip of Cleric and then 5 Wizard. But well, at the very least, we'll at least showcase some items you can utilize for a pure Wizard, and then we can show some more stuff for a Cleric dip, or giving access to wearing medium armor. So simply by being human or a half-elf, you can get access to shield proficiency, so obviously you're going to want a shield here. As for your headpiece, don't mind this. I just have the headband in select, because I realized I didn't really have any non-armor type headpieces that we were using for this character, so don't mind that. But what you should probably know by now, in Act 1, there is a bunch of lightning charge here, which goes very nicely for any wizard or, I guess, cloth type spellcaster. And what this does is anytime you cast your spells, pretty much, you'll be able to generate lightning charges, and all these different things will affect your lightning charges, or benefit from you having lightning charges in different ways. Pretty much most of the stuff you'll find in the Underdark. The spell Sparkler, however, you can find by saving the lady inside the Burning Inn. Mind you, you can totally slaughter all of the Flaming Fist outside, and then still save her, and she'll still reward you with this lovely staff here. And then everything else here is just everything that deals with Sparks Wall or the lightning charges. However, One thing you want to note when you're playing a wizard is you want to hold on to as many scrolls as you can and might cycle through all of your different items that grant spell-like abilities, such as our lovely Morning Frost here. Granted, this one just gives us a cantrip, but there are other staves that we have access to at the moment, such as Staff of Crones, which gives us to use Ray of Sickness for once for free. And then more importantly, one thing you must get, no matter what character you're playing that has, well, spellcasters in general that need spell slots restored, is getting the Pearl of Power from Omelum after you complete your Mushroom Quest. What this is it's a necklace that you can wear that will allow you to restore your spell slots, only up to 3rd level though. But still a nice way to make your adventuring day last a little bit longer. Another fantastic necklace that your Necromancer Wizard is going to want to use is the Psychic Spark, which you can acquire from Blurred down at the Underdark in the Myconid Village, which will make all of your magic missile spells cast an additional dart. And on top of that, it gives you a free cast of magic missile once per day. Pretty damn good. And as for rings, I'm not going to really go too much into them because at this point, you guys have seen all the other rings I've been showing. They'll be just nice on your Necromancer Wizard. Some other options you might consider is this lovely, lovely robe here. Look at that drip. Doesn't that look nice? I think it looks nice. One thing to note though too is if you are playing a pure Necromancer Wizard, you're going to want to have Mage Armor. We don't have it on this character obviously because he is a Cleric and we're using Medium Armor. But let's go ahead and pretend that our AC is 3 higher because Mage Armor increases your AC by 3 and also continue to get your Dex bonus. So if you are playing a Necromancer Wizard, you're going to want to have more Dexterity than this character. Obviously we're playing a bit of a Cleric, so we have 12 in our Wisdom and then 18 into our... So here's our armor for our pure Necromancer Wizard. You can acquire this by doing a Dastardly Deed with Will and not seeing reason. That's all I'm going to say there. Many of you who watch my videos or see my streams, you know what I'm talking about, and I'm so sorry. One of these days, I won't do that option. One of these days. Anyways, if you did decide to do a Death Cleric Necromancer Wizard, pretty much any of the armor options that I showed you for the Hexblade and for the Death Cleric will be plenty fine on your Necromancer Wizard, at least in the early game. I do want to note that there are plenty of good items that you might want to acquire for a Bard. Should you rescue Valu from the Goblin Camp, he will reward you with a nice little vest that you can use on your Bards. Or, in addition, you're probably going to want to have the Whispering Promise, as well as a hat near Alfira in the Druid Grove. So just behind Alfira, let's see here. So Alfira is right here, and just behind her is a chest, and inside it is a lovely musketeer-looking hat, which is fantastic for bards, which will allow you to make, whenever you use one of your bardic inspirations on somebody, it'll also heal them. And in combination with all those other healing items, you might want to utilize those as... Just wanted to shout out the bards, even though bardic necromancers aren't nearly as common as the rest of that we're covering. But I still wanted to throw them in there. Alright, and that is pretty much what I think is most of the gear for Act 1. We'll talk about Act 2 and Act 3 gear in just a moment. So as for some armor in Act 2, another good option should you tire of your Adamantine split mail, though this will last you just fine all the way to Act 3 personally. Should you pass your insight check when she assigns you to go look for Balthazar, you could ask her for supplies, in which case she'll direct you over to the Bugbear here, and he'll be able to sell you items that weren't there before. Notably, the Dwarven split mail here. It's 1 AC higher, and also gives you a +2 on Constitution. Pretty solid overall, but again, the Adamantine split mail will do you just fine. It's also really pricey, so if you can afford it, go for it. A few things you could look for here in Act 2 for your spellcasters. However, probably the best one, in my opinion, is the Spell Crux Amulet, which you can acquire by, well, getting rid of the Jailer. She possesses this lovely amulet, and it will allow you to recover a spell slot of any level. So this is fantastic for any spellcaster that you acquire. Whereas the Pearl of Power can only get you up to 3, the Spell Crux Amulet can get you all the way to level 6. There are also 2 other great options really early on in Act 2. The Cloak of Protection, which will give you another armor class as well as a saving throw, just like the Ring of Protection. And they do actually stack here, unlike on tabletop, I believe. And then there's also the Evasive Shoes, should you have aided the Tieflings. Mole's little devious assistant, I can't remember his name at the top of my head, the little boy, I think it's Mathis. Anyhow, he will sell you these lovely pair of boots. It gives you +1 acrobatics and another AC. Always nice to have. And in combination, as you can see here, we have a nice beefy AC of 23, and this is using a two-hander. We have the Wondrous Gloves, which gives us another AC, +1 armor class to our boots, our gloves, our cloak, and our ring. That's a +4 AC. Now, obviously, if we were wearing a shield, we'd be having another AC on top of that. And for those who weren't tracking, we're also getting a +1 AC bonus to our defense fighting style from our paladin, rather than taking the great weapon fighting. I favor the defenses most of the time. And there are a few good caster items throughout the game, such as this here, the Oathbreaker Hood, gives you a +1 spell save DC, as well as a +1 to initiative rolls. And speaking of initiative rolls, the Sentinel Shield is available in Act 2 at the Last Light Inn, and this will give you a +3 initiative to your initiative rolls. So this will give a +3 bonus to your initiative, as well as getting advantage on perception checks. Pretty sweet. Good damn shield. But all in all, there aren't too many crazy items other than these in Act 2 until you get towards the end of the chapter, which you can find most of the things that usually befit Shadowheart or somebody who would like to be obscured, with items located in the Shar's Temple. And of course, the lovely items on Ketheric, especially his beautiful armor. And another lovely location in Act 3 is Mystic Carrion's house, which can be found down here, south of Sorcerer's Sundries. You can either find this hidden entrance over here, or a little cat hole down here if you move that box. But luckily for us, we did find this hidden passage. Simply unlock it, or just smack it, and you can make your way in here. Now there are a couple of quest lines involved with Mystic Carrion, and he can be a challenging fight as well, but he does possess an amazing Necromancy staff that we must acquire. However, by trading with him, he does have one of the best armors for a Spore Druid here. This item may not seem too crazy at first. As you can see, all those gives you a +1 to spell DCs when dealing necrotic damage, and they'll deal an additional 1 necrotic damage on top of that, so whoop-de-doo. And then the more important part here is, while we are imbued with our symbiotic entity, we'll be able to spread Bibberbang spores, Timisk spores, and more importantly, Haze spores. We'll showcase that in a moment. He also sells some high-level spells that you can scribe or just keep in your stock if you have enough money for it. But he also sells this lovely Hood of the Weave as well. A, it looks good, and B, it gives you a +2 spell save DC on all of your spell attack rolls. Quite nice to have. So as for Druid items, you'll probably be using the same stuff that the Cleric has access to, so be sure to reference that for early game gear. There are some other unique stuff for Druids in the early game in Act 1 as well, but I'm not going to cover it in this video. I will cover 3 pieces of gear that are unique to the Druid that will be quite nice for you to come by. So first things first, we're going to look at our Act 2 items. The Ironwood Club, which doesn't look remarkable at all, right? Whoop-de-doo, who cares? But if we go ahead and cast Shillelagh on ourselves here. Hey, what's going on, Mathara? Sorry about this. Bonk! You know what, let's turn into a zombie too while we're at it. Alright, so the thing about the Ironwood Club is that when you cast Shillelagh on it, it'll deal extra damage here. So the club itself is doing 1d8. It's +1 from being a +1 weapon, and then +5 from using our Wisdom modifier, since it's Shillelagh. And then, if you notice, we get an extra 1d4 bludgeoning damage from Ironwood Club. But yeah, unfortunately it doesn't really show you here. Let me see if it'll show it in this spot right here. Yeah, it does 714. You can find this Ironwood Club on the Shadow Curse Shambling Mound, not too far from the tavern where you meet Jaheira. The Iron Vine Shield, however, is found at the Toll House in one of the back rooms there, after you defeat the Toll Guardian. While the wearer is holding a weapon empowered with Shillelagh, and when they are hit by a melee attack, the attacker will take some piercing damage, equal to our Wisdom modifier. Nothing super crazy to write home about, but it's still pretty fun to have, nonetheless. Now, the real reason we want to be a Spore Druid is not the fact that we're just a Druid, but this item here alone is crazy. So let's go ahead and use our symbiotic entity here to give us a bunch of temporary hit points. 48, not too shabby, pretty tanky. But while we're wearing this lovely outfit, We'll do a little bit extra damage with our necrotic abilities. Pretty solid. We get a +1 DC to our spells saving throws. But more importantly, we get access to different spore abilities, such as spreading our spreading spore here, which is that nuke out that we had from before. It'll do damage to anybody that's standing inside of it except our allies. We can use Timbus spores to confuse our enemies and befuddle them. We can use Bibberbang spores to cause noxious fumes. But more importantly, we get haste spores, which is all the perks of haste in an AoE without the downsides, which is phenomenal when we have a giant undead horde. Just make sure they stand in the haste spores so they can get the effects of the haste each turn. Really damn good. So should you manage to eliminate Mystic Carrion, most likely involving destroying certain body parts throughout the city, you'll be able to acquire this lovely Necromancer staff, the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. It is an incredibly powerful Necromancy staff. There are a few features on it that are pretty good, and we'll go over them right now. Heightened Necromancy, creatures you have disadvantage on your saving throws against your Necromancy spells, pretty sweet. But more importantly, Life Essence Harvest. Whenever the wielder kills a hostile creature with a spell, they greedily absorb its energy and you'll gain Life Essence until their long rest. And Life Essence will let you cast any Necromancy spell without expending a spell slot. And that could be, again, that is any Necromancy spell for free. So we could cast a Circle of Death, Eye Bite, Dethrone, Light, Harm, whatever you so desire, as long as you have access to it. So this is a fantastic staff, not just for Necromancy wizards, but also for Druids and Clerics. Considering that Clerics will have access to Harm. Pretty solid for being able to cast for free. Reminder, you do have to keep killing targets in order to get this free cast, but that's not too hard to acquire since there's so many targets, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word. So really, this is really the only Necromancer item I want to discuss in Act 3 because that's really all that matters. Of course, you can acquire another Necromancy staff at the circus. The ringleader actually has a Necromancy staff here called Hollow Staff. It also has heightened Necromancy, giving disadvantage to enemies against your Necromancy spells. It also lets you cast Arms of Hadar for free. Whoop-de-doo. It's nothing in comparison to our cherished Necromancy. Alright, and that's pretty much all the items I have to go over. Certainly there are plenty of other really good items for you to acquire in this act and the game itself. I just wanted to go over some stuff here for Necromancy specifically. Well, kinda. That and I'm just sick of yapping, and I'm sure you guys are sick of me yapping too. And with all of that, this will finally conclude our Patch 8 Necronomicon. If you made it this far, I wholeheartedly appreciate you for watching. Baldur's Gate 3 has been such a fun time, especially being able to play Necromancers in a variety of different ways. And I really hope that this guide helped you, and if it did or didn't, please comment down below what you discovered or what I should have included into it. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe if you liked a guide like this, as I intend to do this kind of type of guide for other games, not just Baldur's Gate 3. Speaking of which, we have a Discord link down below should you like to theorycraft Necromancy in other games, not just Baldur's Gate 3. Anyhow, it's been a blast making this Necronomicon, and at this point, this is post-editing Remortis here, and I am beyond editing fatigue. Really hope you guys enjoy the video, and I will hopefully see you in the next one or the next stream. Farewell for now.